By late afternoon, the rain had finally tapered off, leaving the air damp and heavy. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, the thick canopy above blotting out what little light managed to pierce through the clouds. I kept moving, though my steps had become sluggish and uneven, my ankle screaming with every shift in weight. I'd long since stopped trying to navigate. All I could do was keep heading downhill, following the subtle dips and folds of the landscape. I hoped it would eventually lead me to a road, or a trail, or something other than endless trees and mud. My shoulder had grown worse. The pain was no longer a sharp, immediate agony, but a deep, grinding ache that seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart. I tried not to think about it, but every step sent fresh jolts of pain radiating down my arm. I paused once to check my pack, rummaging through it with clumsy fingers. The fall had broken a water bottle and soaked most of my supplies. My food was ruined. The granola bars and trail mix turned to a sodden mess of crumbs. I managed to salvage a single protein bar, its packaging torn but still mostly intact. I forced myself to eat it slowly, chewing each bite until it was a tasteless paste in my mouth. I washed it down with what little water I had left, my throat raw and aching. I kept moving, though my legs felt like they were weighed down with lead. The ground grew steeper, the trees thinning out until I found myself standing at the edge of another ravine. This one was wider and deeper than the last, the sides slick with mud and loose rock. There was no way around it. I'd have to climb down, cross the narrow stream at the bottom, and find a way back up the other side. I stared down into the ravine, my stomach twisting with dread. The descent was brutal. I slipped and slid my way down the embankment, my hands clutching at roots and rocks as I scrambled for balance. Twice, I lost my footing and tumbled forward, my injured shoulder slamming into the ground with a force that left me gasping. When I finally reached the bottom, I collapsed beside the stream, my breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. The water was clearer here, the current swift but not dangerous. I drank until my stomach twisted with cold, then splashed water over my face and neck in a desperate attempt to clear my head. The climb up the opposite side was worse. My muscles screamed with every movement, my ankle barely able to support my weight. I used my good arm to haul myself upward, fingers clawing at the muddy slope as I struggled for purchase. It took me nearly an hour to make it to the top. When I finally hauled myself over the edge, I lay there for several minutes, chest heaving, my entire body shaking with exhaustion. The daylight was fading, the sky turning a dull, steel gray as evening crept in. I knew I couldn't afford to stop. If I stayed still for too long, the cold would seep into my bones and finish what the fall had started. I forced myself to my feet and kept walking. The forest around me was a blur of twisted branches and moss-covered trunks, everything bathed in the dim, fading light. My legs moved on autopilot, one foot dragging in front of the other with mechanical determination. I didn't even notice the road until I nearly stumbled onto it. It was little more than a dirt track, the ruts filled with water and mud from the recent rain. But it was a road, path, proof that I wasn't as lost as I'd feared. I followed it, my steps dragging, my mind fogged with pain and exhaustion. I didn't know how long I walked. Could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, I heard the low rumble of an engine. I turned, squinting against the fading light, and saw the faint glow of headlights cutting through the trees. Relief flooded through me, so sudden and overwhelming that my knees buckled and I nearly collapsed. The truck came into view, an old, battered pickup with mud splashed along the sides. It slowed as it approached, the engine growling like some wild animal as it crawled to a stop. The driver was a man, his face shadowed by the brim of a hat. He leaned out the window, eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled, mud-caked appearance. I must have looked like something that had crawled out of a grave. I didn't care. I raised my good arm and waved, my fingers trembling. The man nodded, his expression unreadable, and gestured for me to climb into the passenger seat. The warmth of the truck's cab was almost unbearable. I sank into the seat, my entire body going slack as the heat seeped into my frozen limbs. I barely noticed the man speaking, his words a distant, garbled hum. He drove me to the nearest town, a small, forgotten place clinging to the edge of the forest like moss on stone. The locals stared as I limped into the tiny clinic, their eyes wide and curious. The doctor cleaned my wounds, set my shoulder, and wrapped my ankle in layers of gauze and tape. The pain was still there, but dulled now, muted beneath the haze of exhaustion. I spent the night in a cheap motel, my body finally allowed to rest. When I woke the next morning, the sun was shining through the thin curtains, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I was alive, battered, bruised, but alive. I checked out of the motel and caught a bus back to where I'd parked my car. The drive home was long and uneventful, the landscape passing by in a blur of green and gray. I didn't go hiking again for a long time after that. The memory of the fall, the endless struggle to keep moving, haunted me for months. But eventually, the fear faded, replaced by a cautious determination. The night stretched on in thick silence. Every so often, the fabric of sleep would tear, and I'd jerk awake to the sound of nothing but my own breath rasping against the cool air. The darkness felt oppressive, pressing in on me like damp earth. My fingers twitched, half-formed dreams lingering as the thud of my heartbeat filled my ears. Morning came sluggishly, the light slow to burn through the mist hanging low over the meadow. I lay in my sleeping bag, unwilling to move, dreading the chill that would follow once I unzipped the tent. When I finally did, the air felt knife-edged, slicing at the skin of my face and hands. I packed quickly, my movements still awkward, muscles stiff from another fitful night. I could feel my own nerves wearing thin, the days of solitude fraying at my composure. Every step I took felt like a gamble, a blind stride into some vague but persistent unease. The plan was to follow the trail over another ridge and down into a broad basin where I'd camp the third night. After that, I'd loop back toward the trailhead, a straightforward route, challenging enough to feel like an accomplishment but not technically difficult. But that morning, the trail felt unfamiliar. The landscape was the same pine groves, the same tumbled rocks, the same stretches of tangled brush. But something about the path itself seemed subtly wrong. Narrower, more twisted, as if it had shifted in the night. I checked my map repeatedly, cross-referencing with my GPS. Everything matched, and yet the trail felt different underfoot. My boots scuffed at loose soil, stones that tumbled free with each step. I could hear my own breath, too fast and shallow. Around midday, the wind picked up. It tore through the trees, tugging at branches with a force that rattled my nerves. It carried the dry, metallic tang of autumn, mixed with something else, something faintly putrid, like rotting vegetation. The odor clung to me as I descended into the basin, my feet skidding on patches of loose gravel. The air was cooler here, shadows deepening where the slope met the valley floor. I could feel sweat drying on my skin, leaving me chilled. The basin stretched out before me like a sunken scar, the terrain rough and uneven. Sparse patches of grass fought for space between rocks and low shrubs. I set up camp near a cluster of boulders that offered some windbreak, the ground sloping unevenly beneath my tent. I tried to distract myself by setting up camp with care. I double-checked the stakes, secured the rainfly, organized my gear with the precision of someone trying to impose control over an environment that felt increasingly hostile. Again, I skipped the fire. I couldn't explain the unease, but something about drawing attention to myself with smoke and light felt wrong. I ate another cold meal and crawled into my tent as the sky darkened. I woke again sometime past midnight, my throat dry, bladder uncomfortably full. I lay there for a while, hoping the sensation would pass. But the discomfort grew until I finally forced myself out of the sleeping bag. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the air bracing against my skin. The moon hung low and swollen, half obscured by clouds. The landscape was washed in pale, distorted shadows. As I relieved myself near the boulders, I caught a faint glimmer of light off to my right. My eyes snapped toward it, the movement instinctual. For a moment, I thought it was just a reflection. moonlight catching on dew or a shard of glass. But it was too steady, too deliberate. The beam wavered slightly, a pale, narrow line cutting through the darkness before flicking off just as abruptly. I stood there, heart thudding against my ribs. The cold air felt suddenly sharp, cutting into my lungs with every breath. My fingers trembled as I zipped the tent closed and crawled back inside. I tried to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, or perhaps another hiker's flashlight from some distant campsite. But I'd seen no one else since I left the trailhead. And this far out, even the most dedicated hikers rarely strayed off established routes. Sleep was impossible. I lay there, eyes wide in the darkness, ears straining for the faintest hint of sound. Nothing came, but the silence felt unnatural, like something was holding its breath, waiting. Dawn broke sluggishly, the sky a dull slate gray. I packed up with hands that shook more from anxiety than cold. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the sense of being watched had grown sharper, more defined. I kept moving, pushing myself through the basin and up the opposite slope. The climb was steep, my legs burning as I scrambled over rocks and loose dirt. I made myself keep moving, the exertion grounding me, drawing focus away from the knot of fear tightening in my chest. By late afternoon, I crested the ridge and found myself looking down into another narrow valley, dense with pine and tangled underbrush. The trail continued its descent, threading through the trees like a thread sewn into fabric. I wanted to stop. My legs ached, my shoulders sore from the weight of the pack. But the thought of setting up camp again, of spending another night in the open, felt unbearable. I pressed on, my pace uneven and jerky. Every sound seemed amplified, the creak of branches, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. All of it laced through with a high, buzzing tension I couldn't shake. And then the light returned. Just as the last traces of daylight faded, I saw it again. A faint, wavering beam, darting between the trees like something alive. It moved with purpose, weaving through the undergrowth before vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. I froze, my breath locked in my chest. The darkness felt thicker, more complete. My skin prickled, sweat breaking out despite the chill. Whatever was out there, it was following me. The air had a heaviness to it, the kind that seemed to press down against my shoulders as I set out on the trail. Late August heat settled over the mountains like a smothering blanket, the sun already high and searing by the time I started the climb. I had planned this trip for months, poring over maps and checking weather forecasts, obsessing over gear lists until I felt confident I was prepared for anything the backcountry could throw at me. The trailhead sat at the edge of a dusty parking lot, nearly deserted except for a couple of trucks and a rusted sedan with a flat tire. I double-checked the supplies in my pack: water, snacks, first aid kit, a lightweight tent, sleeping bag, and the emergency beacon I always carried but hoped never to use. I'd read online that the trail was strenuous, rarely maintained, but beautiful for those who made the effort. The first few miles were easy enough, weaving through dense pine and spruce, the air rich with the earthy scent of needles and bark. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the solitude, the rhythmic crunch of my boots against the dirt. Birdsong mingled with the occasional rustle of leaves as squirrels darted through the underbrush. The trail was narrow, winding its way along a ridgeline that offered brief glimpses of the valley below, shadowed and blue in the distance. By noon, I'd covered nearly 7 miles, my shirt soaked with sweat and clinging to my back. I stopped for a break on a flat stretch of rock, stripping off my pack and guzzling water from my canteen. The heat was unrelenting, the sun blazing through a cloudless sky. I forced myself to eat a granola bar even though the thought of food turned my stomach. I knew I needed the calories, the energy. The next section of trail grew steeper, the ascent brutal under the weight of my pack. My legs burned with the effort, each step a conscious decision to keep moving forward. I could feel the skin on my shoulders chafing where the straps dug in, slick with sweat. The trail narrowed further, the ground uneven and littered with loose stones that shifted treacherously beneath my feet. As I climbed, the trees thinned, giving way to rocky outcroppings and low, scrubby brush. The wind picked up, offering a brief, blessed relief from the heat. I paused to catch my breath, hands braced against my knees, and looked out over the landscape. The view was stunning, a sweeping panorama of rugged peaks and deep, forested valleys. But it felt distant, the beauty tempered by the ache in my muscles and the dryness in my mouth. I pushed on. The trail grew fainter, almost swallowed by the landscape, as if it hadn't been used in years. I double-checked my map and compass, confirming I was still on course. It was harder to gauge my progress without clear markers, the terrain growing more unforgiving with each mile. My legs trembled with exhaustion, but I kept moving, unwilling to turn back after coming so far. The sun dipped lower in the sky, the light taking on a reddish hue that made the rocks and dirt glow. I'd hoped to reach a small alpine lake I'd read about, a secluded spot nestled between two peaks. It would be a good place to set up camp, refill my water, and rest before tackling the descent the next day. But the trail continued to degrade, forcing me to pick my way through patches of loose shale and jagged stone. I stumbled more than once, my balance thrown by the uneven ground. Sweat ran into my eyes, stinging and blurring my vision. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and kept moving. When I finally reached the lake, the sun had nearly set, its last rays glinting off the surface of the water. The air was cooler here, crisp and sharp with the faint scent of pine. I dropped my pack and stretched, feeling the satisfying crackle of joints stiff from hours of climbing. Setting up camp was a mechanical process, muscle memory guiding my hands as I pitched the tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and prepared a quick meal over the small stove I'd packed. Darkness settled over the lake, the stars emerging in a brilliant scatter across the sky. I ate in silence, my mind too tired to do more than focus on the motions of chewing and swallowing. I slipped into my tent and zipped the door shut, the thin nylon a flimsy barrier against the vastness of the wilderness. Exhaustion hit me hard, pulling me into sleep before I had time to worry about anything beyond the ache in my legs and the dull throb of my shoulders. I woke to a dull, insistent pain in my side. For a moment, I couldn't place it, my mind still groggy from sleep. Then I registered the stiffness in my joints, the soreness that radiated through my muscles. I shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position, and felt the sharp jab of something pressing against my ribcage. I fumbled for my headlamp and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. Something had shifted beneath my tent, a lump pressing up from the ground like a buried rock that hadn't been there before. I cursed my carelessness, realizing I must have set up camp over uneven ground. But when I crawled out of the tent to inspect the area, the ground was smooth, undisturbed. No rocks, no roots, nothing that should have caused the pressure I'd felt. I dismissed it, chalking it up to the discomfort of sleeping on hard ground. But as I crawled back into the tent, unease crept in, slow and cold. The silence outside was absolute, oppressive. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the faint rustle of wind through the brush and the occasional creak of branches. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and restless. The next day's hike was worse. My legs felt heavier, my energy sapped by the rough terrain and poor sleep. I struggled to maintain my footing on the rocky slopes, my knees aching with each descent. By mid-afternoon, I realized I was moving slower than I should have been, the miles stretching out longer than anticipated. I hadn't seen another hiker since setting out from the trailhead. The isolation felt more oppressive with each step, the silence like a weight pressing against my ears. I'll keep building this story up with more detail and tension. The mud only got worse as the rain continued. Every step became a battle, my boots sinking into the sludge and pulling free with a squelching sound that echoed strangely in the stillness. It was as if the woods themselves were trying to hold me back. I had to keep moving. The terrain grew steeper, the path narrowing to little more than a faint scar in the landscape. I followed it doggedly, sweat mingling with the rain that soaked through my jacket and dripped from the brim of my hat. My shoulders ached from the weight of the pack, the straps digging into muscle and bone with every step. Hours passed. My legs burned with exertion, the mud clinging to me like a second skin. The forest grew denser, branches whipping at my face and snagging on my sleeves. I stumbled more than once, the slick ground betraying me with every careless misstep. I was too tired to be cautious, pushing forward with a desperation that felt almost animal. The rain had eased to a mist by afternoon, but the cold had only worsened, the damp seeping into my bones. I was miles from the car, from the comfort of a warm, dry bed, from anything resembling safety. And then, as the light began to fade, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Footprints, not mine, fresh. The mud held the shape of a boot, slightly larger than my own. It sank deep into the ground, the edges sharp and recent. My pulse quickened as I crouched beside it, examining the print with a mounting sense of unease. There shouldn't have been anyone out here, not this far, not on a trail that barely existed. I scanned the area, eyes darting between the trees. The forest was silent, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. I could hear my own heartbeat, a rapid thudding that drowned out everything else. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound. I straightened, my hands trembling. It was just a footprint. Someone else had been out here at some point. Maybe a hunter or another hiker, someone passing through. But it didn't feel like that. Felt wrong. I pushed on, trying to shake the sense of being watched. The woods closed around me, the darkness deepening until I had to switch on my headlamp to see more than a few feet in front of me. The beam of light cut through the mist, illuminating the twisted trunks and gnarled roots that seemed to reach for me from the ground. The air grew colder, my breath visible in pale clouds that dissipated almost as quickly as they formed. I was exhausted. My legs felt like lead, every step a struggle against gravity and fatigue. But I couldn't stop. Not here. Not with the memory of that footprint etched into my mind. I stumbled upon a narrow ledge overlooking a shallow ravine. The drop wasn't far, maybe 15 feet, but the ground below was a tangle of jagged rocks and thorn bushes. I had to be careful, picking my way along the edge with my arms held out for balance. The rain had made the rocks slick, their surfaces treacherous underfoot. Twice I slipped, catching myself against the rough stone before I could fall. The cold had seeped into my bones by then, my fingers numb and clumsy as I gripped at anything that offered support. Night was coming fast. I needed to find somewhere to make camp, somewhere sheltered from the wind and rain. But the terrain only grew more hostile, the trees thinning to twisted shrubs that clung to the rocky slopes like desperate survivors. It wasn't until I rounded a bend in the trail that I saw it. A cave. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through with my pack still on. But the darkness beyond was inviting, a reprieve from the cold and wet. I hesitated only a moment before ducking inside, my headlamp cutting a thin beam of light through the gloom. The cave was shallow, no more than a hollow carved into the hillside, but it was dry. I could feel the difference immediately, the air musty and still. I dropped my pack and collapsed onto the ground, my muscles trembling with exhaustion. I dug through my pack, hands shaking as I unrolled my sleeping bag and spread it across the uneven floor. My fingers were too numb to properly light the stove, so I settled for choking down a protein bar and gulping tepid water from my bottle. The silence inside the cave was oppressive. It pressed in from all sides, a smothering absence of sound that made my own breathing seem deafening. I lay there, wrapped in my sleeping bag, staring up at the stone ceiling until my eyes grew heavy. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. It was the smell that did it, a foul, cloying stench that clung to the air like something rotting. It was so strong I gagged, my eyes flying open as panic tore through me. The cave was dark. My headlamp had gone out at some point during the night, leaving me in a blackness so complete it felt like drowning. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking as I clicked it on. The beam wavered, weak and flickering, but enough to show me the small space I had holed up in. Something had been there, My pack had been dragged a few feet from where I'd left it. The contents spilled across the ground like the aftermath of a careless robbery. Food wrappers torn open, my map crumpled and smeared with mud. But it wasn't just the mess that sent my heart into overdrive. It was the footprint, pressed into the dirt floor, clear and unmistakable. I wasn't alone. I scrambled to my feet, my body protesting with every movement. Fear had sharpened my senses, adrenaline cutting through the exhaustion like a blade. I shoved my gear back into my pack with clumsy, desperate movements. I needed to leave. Now, the trail would be worse in the rain, but I didn't care. Anything was better than staying in that cave, knowing that someone or something had been watching me. My feet barely held me upright as I stumbled through the trees. Every joint in my body ached, the cold and exhaustion turning my movements stiff and clumsy. My vision blurred, dark spots creeping into the edges of my sight whenever I pushed myself too hard. I had no idea how long I'd been wandering. Could have been hours or maybe days. The endless stretch of woods felt like a maze, each twisted tree and tangled bush blending into the next. I clung to the faint hope that I might stumble across a trail or some sign of civilization. The overhang I'd slept under had given me little protection from the freezing temperatures. My emergency blanket was crumpled and torn, useless against the relentless chill. My fingers were swollen and red, the skin cracked and raw. I couldn't feel them anymore, the numbness spreading up my arms and settling like a weight on my chest. Hunger gnawed at me, a sharp, relentless pain that left me lightheaded and weak. I tried to forage for something edible, roots, berries, anything that might give me the energy to keep moving. But the forest was barren, the ground slick with mud and the plants sparse and withered. I kept pushing forward, my steps uneven and dragging. The terrain grew rockier, the ground sloping downward until I found myself at the edge of a ravine. Water trickled along the bottom, a narrow creek winding its way through the rocks. I slid down the slope, my feet skidding on loose gravel. When I reached the bottom, I dropped to my knees and cupped my hands in the icy water. It tasted bitter, but I drank greedily, the cold liquid stinging my throat. For a moment, I rested there, my body trembling from the exertion. The creek was my only guide now, its path the only thing that made any sense in the sprawling wilderness. If I followed it long enough, it might lead me to something, anything that could save me. I dragged myself to my feet and started walking along the creek's edge. The ground was uneven, the rocks slick with moss and mud. I slipped several times, each fall jarring my already bruised and battered body. The day passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burning with every breath. The temperature remained brutally low, the air so cold it felt like needles against my skin. I lost track of how many times I fell. My knees were scraped raw, my palms torn and bleeding from trying to catch myself on sharp rocks. At some point, I stopped feeling the pain, my senses dulled by sheer fatigue. When night began to fall again, I realized with a sickening lurch that I was losing the battle. My body was shutting down, my movements growing slower and less coordinated with each passing hour. The darkness closed in around me, the forest swallowing what little light remained. I stumbled over a root and crashed to the ground, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. I lay there, my chest heaving, the cold earth pressing against my cheek. I could feel the moisture seeping through my clothes, the chill burrowing deep into my bones. I knew I should get up. I should keep moving, keep fighting. But my body refused to cooperate, every muscle locked in place by exhaustion. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind slipping into a haze of half-formed thoughts and fragmented memories. The world around me felt distant, the sounds of the forest muffled and indistinct. When I woke again, it was to the sensation of warmth, a faint, flickering heat brushing against my skin. I forced my eyes open, my vision swimming as I tried to focus. A fire. Someone had built a fire. I blinked, struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. The flames danced before me, their light casting shadows across the ground. I could feel the heat against my face, the warmth spreading through my frozen limbs. I tried to move, but my body was sluggish and unresponsive. Panic flared in my chest, the realization that I was too weak to even sit up. A figure emerged from the darkness, their outline blurred and indistinct. I couldn't make out their features, but I could feel their presence. Solid, real. They spoke to me, but the words were lost in the roaring of the fire. All I could do was watch as they crouched beside me, their hands pressing something warm and soft against my mouth. Food. I tasted salt and meat, the flavors overwhelming after days of starvation. I tried to swallow, my throat seizing with the effort, but the stranger was patient, feeding me small bites until I could keep them down. Water followed, cool and clean, trickling down my throat and easing the raw ache. I drank greedily, the sensation of moisture a relief beyond words. Sleep claimed me again, my mind sinking into darkness with the warmth of the fire still flickering at the edges of my awareness. When I woke the next time, daylight filtered through the trees. The fire was gone, reduced to a ring of ashes and charred wood. But I felt stronger, my body no longer frozen and numb. I pushed myself upright, my muscles groaning in protest. Whoever had helped me was gone, their presence nothing more than a fading memory. But they had left me something. A small bundle wrapped in cloth, resting beside the remains of the fire. Inside, I found a few strips of dried meat, a canteen of water, and a folded piece of paper. The note was written in neat, careful handwriting. The words simple and direct. Follow the creek downstream. It leads to a road. I clutched the note in my trembling hands, my eyes burning with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Someone had saved me. A stranger, passing through the same desolate wilderness, had stopped to help when I was at my lowest. I did as the note instructed, following the creek with renewed determination. The journey was still grueling, my body battered and weak, but the knowledge that someone had cared enough to help me pushed me forward. By the time I reached the road, my legs were barely holding me upright. But I made it. I collapsed at the edge of the asphalt, my chest heaving with sobs of relief. A passing car found me an hour later. The driver, a kind, older woman, bundled me into her vehicle and drove me to the nearest town. I spent the next few days recovering in a cheap motel, my body slowly mending from the ordeal. The memory of the stranger stayed with me, their act of kindness etched into my mind. Whoever they were, they had saved my life, and I would never forget it. I didn't plan for things to go that way. I was supposed to do a simple solo hike, just a weekend trip, nothing extreme. I'd done longer, harder hikes before, but something about this one still sticks with me, and I don't think I'll ever shake it. It was late fall, and the weather was cooling down fast. The trails were mostly empty since most people preferred the summer months. I liked it that way. There was something peaceful about being alone in the woods, away from everything. No people, no noise, just the sounds of nature. I picked a trail in a remote area, about 5 miles from the nearest town. It wasn't a famous spot, but that was part of the appeal. I found it while searching for lesser-known hiking spots, and the idea of being alone out there felt perfect. The hike started off easy. The first few miles were well-marked, with a clear dirt path cutting through the trees. The forest was thick, but sunlight still managed to filter through in places. The air was cool and crisp, and the only sounds were birds and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I walked at a steady pace, stopping occasionally to drink water or adjust my pack. By midday, I reached a clearing where I planned to set up camp for the night. It was a flat, open space surrounded by trees, with a small stream nearby. I dropped my pack, stretched my legs, and got to work setting up my tent. Everything felt normal, just another hike. As the sun started to set, the temperature dropped fast. I got a fire going and cooked a quick meal. Sitting by the fire, I felt that familiar sense of peace that always came with being alone in nature. But that feeling didn't last. It started with a sound, a single distant snap of a branch. I looked up, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing, probably just an animal. Deer were common in the area, and I figured one had wandered nearby. But then there was another sound, closer this time, a slow, deliberate crunch of leaves, like something heavy moving through the underbrush. I stood up, my heart beating a little faster. My flashlight was in my pack, and I grabbed it, shining it toward the trees. Nothing. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I put more wood on the fire, hoping the light would keep any animals away. Then I sat back down, trying to focus on something else. I told myself I was overreacting. I had hiked alone before, and I had heard noises in the woods before. But the feeling didn't go away. I decided to call it a night early. I put out the fire, zipped myself into my sleeping bag, and closed my eyes. But I didn't sleep. I just laid there listening. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a noise right outside my tent. It was soft at first, a faint rustling sound, like something brushing against the fabric. My breath caught in my throat. Then there was a long, slow dragging sound, moving from one side of the tent to the other. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I just lay there, listening, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The sound stopped. For a long time, there was nothing but silence. I reached for my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent. The cold air hit me as I shined the light outside. Nothing. I stepped out, scanning the area. The trees cast long shadows in the moonlight, and everything looked still. I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight sweeping the ground. Then I saw it. A set of footprints pressed deep into the dirt. They weren't mine. I hadn't seen another person all day. There shouldn't have been anyone else out here. My stomach dropped. I followed the prints with my light, my mind racing. They came from the trees, stopped right outside my tent, then turned and disappeared back into the woods. Someone had been standing there, watching me. I felt exposed, standing out in the open like that. I turned off my flashlight, crouched low, and listened. Nothing. I waited, every nerve in my body on edge. Still nothing. After what felt like an hour, I forced myself to move. I packed up my tent as fast as I could, stuffing everything into my pack with shaking hands. I didn't care about sleep anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I started walking, keeping my flashlight off and moving as quietly as possible. My plan was simple. Get back to the trail and keep moving until I was far enough away. The forest felt different now. Every sound made my skin crawl. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something or someone behind me. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, not mine. I stopped. The sound stopped. I took a step. A second later, another step echoed mine. I turned, shining my light into the trees. Still nothing, but I knew I wasn't alone. I started moving faster, my pulse hammering in my ears. The trail felt longer than I remembered. Every step, I expected to feel a hand on my shoulder or hear something rushing toward me. Then I saw it, my car, parked at the trailhead. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I sprinted the last few feet, threw my pack into the back seat, and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, staring at the dark trail behind me. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know one thing. I won't be hiking alone again, ever. The darkness pressed in from all sides, so thick it felt like a physical weight. The only sound was the steady rush of the creek, a backdrop that grew more oppressive the longer I listened to it. Every rustle of leaves, every faint crack of twigs, twisted my nerves tighter. I kept my eyes open, wide and straining against the blackness, hoping to catch the faintest hint of movement before it was too late. My mind kept circling back to the tracks. Those massive, broad-toed prints pressed so deeply into the soil. The thought of something that big moving silently through the forest made my skin prickle. And the fact that the tracks had been fresh only confirmed what I feared, that whatever it was nearby. The cold crept into my bones, making my muscles stiff and clumsy. I adjusted the emergency blanket around me, but it offered little warmth. My hunger had transformed from a gnawing ache into something sharper, a pain that stabbed at my stomach with each shallow breath. I tried to force myself to think clearly, to make a plan. But every time I tried to focus, my thoughts slipped away, scattering like dry leaves in the wind. Sleep was a distant concept, something my body craved but my mind rejected outright. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Not out here, not with those tracks still haunting me. At some point, the temperature dropped even further. My hands shook, fingers clenching and unclenching against the chill. I curled into a tighter ball, my knees pressed to my chest, trying to conserve what little warmth I could. When the first hint of dawn finally broke through the trees, it was a pale, watery light that seeped into the forest like a slow leak. My muscles screamed as I shifted, the stiffness from a night spent huddled against the tree making it almost impossible to move. My stomach growled angrily, the hunger sharper now, more urgent. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling under my weight. The creek continued its steady gurgle beside me, indifferent to my suffering. I had to keep moving, had to find something, anything that would point me toward civilization. The tracks were still fresh in my mind, but the daylight offered a small measure of courage. Whatever had been out there last night, it was less likely to approach me now. I followed the creek again, sticking as close to the water's edge as I dared. The terrain remained rough, the ground slick with mud and tangled with roots that tripped me more times than I could count. My progress was maddeningly slow, but I pressed on, the desperation gnawing at me like a living thing. It must have been hours before I stumbled upon the first sign of hope. A broken beer bottle half buried in the mud. It was nothing more than shattered glass and rusted metal, but it meant people had been here at some point. My heart quickened, the dull fatigue receding just enough to give me a burst of energy. I scoured the ground for more signs, more hints that I was heading in the right direction. And then, just as the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, I saw it. A rusted metal sign, half hidden behind a curtain of ivy and moss. The words were barely legible, the paint chipped and faded, but it was a sign, proof that I was no longer hopelessly lost. I followed the trail the sign indicated, my steps quickening despite the pain lancing through my feet. The air grew warmer, the trees thinning out just enough to let patches of sunlight filter through. The trail was rough, overgrown in places, but it was there. A narrow path that twisted and turned, but always led forward. Night was beginning to fall again when I heard it, the unmistakable hum of an engine. I stumbled forward, the sound pulling me like a lifeline. My legs felt like dead weight, my breaths ragged and uneven. But the noise grew louder, clearer, until I broke through the trees and found myself standing on the edge of a dirt road. A truck rumbled past, its headlights slicing through the darkness. I waved frantically, my arms flailing like a madman. The truck slowed, brake lights flaring red before it came to a halt a few yards ahead. Relief crashed over me in a tidal wave. I half jogged, half staggered toward the vehicle, my body protesting every step. When I reached the truck, the driver leaned out the window, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. I collapsed to my knees, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. The words tumbled from my mouth, incoherent and desperate, but the man must have understood enough to let me climb into the passenger seat. The warmth of the cab was a shock, the heat blasting from the vents making my skin prickle. I leaned back against the seat, my eyes fluttering shut despite my efforts to stay awake. The man spoke to me, asked questions maybe, but I couldn't respond. My throat was dry, my head spinning with a mixture of hunger, fatigue, and overwhelming relief. The last thing I remembered was the sensation of movement, the truck rolling forward, the road stretching out ahead of us, taking me away from the forest and the endless nightmare it had become. I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by sterile white walls and the quiet hum of machinery. It took me a moment to piece everything together, my thoughts sluggish and disjointed. Dehydration, they told me, hypothermia, exhaustion, The bruises and cuts lining my arms and legs were superficial compared to the damage I'd done to myself by pushing too hard for too long. They kept me there for a few days, feeding me and monitoring my recovery. I was lucky, they said. Lucky to have found the road when I did. Lucky the driver had decided to take that route at the exact moment I stumbled out of the woods. The tracks haunted me for weeks afterward. Even after I was discharged, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been following me out there, watching, waiting. But the forest was behind me now, its shadows left to rot among the trees. I'd made it out, I'd survived, and I wouldn't be going back. The sun was just starting to rise as I parked my truck at the trailhead. It was a little past 6 in the morning, and the air was still crisp, the kind of coolness that made you pull your jacket tight around your body. The parking lot was mostly empty except for one other car, a dark sedan with fogged-up windows. I figured someone had either spent the night there or had gotten an early start. I grabbed my pack from the back seat, double-checking that I had my water, snacks, flashlight, and knife. My boots felt snug, laced up tight. This was supposed to be a solo trip, just me, the woods, and about 16 miles of rugged backcountry trails. No cell service out here, just the way I liked it. The first few miles were easy, a gradual incline, packed dirt, and thick trees on either side. The morning was silent except for the occasional rustling of leaves. Birds chirped in the distance, but otherwise, it was just me and my breathing. I liked hiking alone. It gave me time to think, to clear my head. A few miles in, I came across a fork in the trail. The left path was wider, well-trodden. The right was narrower, almost hidden by overgrowth. I pulled out my map. The right trail was the one I needed. Less traveled, but it cut through a more scenic part of the forest. It would save me about 2 miles. I adjusted my pack and stepped onto the narrower path. The trees seemed taller here, pressing in closer. The air felt different, thicker. The ground was damp, soft under my boots. I moved carefully, stepping over fallen branches, watching my footing. After about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen a single marker. No blazes, no signs. I checked my map again, frowning. I should have passed a creek by now. I stopped to listen. Nothing. No birds, no wind. Just silence. I turned around to backtrack, but something caught my eye off to the side. A dark shape between the trees. A cabin. It was old, nearly swallowed by the forest. The roof sagged. The walls were covered in moss. No windows, just a door hanging slightly open. It looked abandoned. I wasn't about to go inside, but I moved closer, just to see. The wood was rotting, the door barely hanging onto its hinges. Something about it made my stomach twist. I stepped back. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing, just trees. I swallowed hard, gripping the straps of my pack. I needed to get back to the main trail. I started walking faster this time. The silence felt heavier, like the trees were pressing in on me. 10 minutes passed, then 20. My breathing was sharp, my pulse pounding. I should have been back to the fork by now, but I wasn't. I stopped to catch my breath. That's when I saw the boot print, fresh in the mud. Someone else was out here. It wasn't mine. It was bigger, deeper. Someone heavier than me had walked this way. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the woods. Nothing. I kept walking, faster now. My eyes darted side to side. Every shadow looked wrong. Every branch felt like it was about to snap. I was being watched. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that I was just lost and spooking myself. But then I saw it. Another boot print, then another, and another, leading in a circle. My stomach dropped. Someone had been walking around in this spot, watching, waiting. I turned and started moving. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just needed to go. I picked a direction and walked, forcing myself to stay calm. That's when I heard it. A whistle, high-pitched, sharp, came from behind me. I stopped. My blood turned ice cold. Then another whistle. Closer. I bolted. Branches slapped against my face. My legs burned as I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran. Then, suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath me. I tumbled, rolling down a slope, my pack yanking me back. I hit the ground hard, knocking the wind out of me. My vision blurred. My head spun. I struggled to sit up, groaning. My left knee throbbed. I tried to stand, but pain shot through my leg. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The trees looked different here, thicker, older. Then I saw it. A rope, hanging from a tree. Old, frayed. A noose. My stomach clenched. Nearby, a pile of bones. Small ones. I tried to breathe. Tried to tell myself they were just animal bones. But deep down, I knew they weren't. I needed to move. Now, I pushed myself up, ignoring the pain. I limped forward, forcing my body to keep going. Every step hurt, but I couldn't stop. Then I heard it again. The whistle. Closer. I turned my head, and that's when I saw him. A man, standing between the trees, motionless, watching. I couldn't see his face, just his shape. Tall, unmoving. I didn't wait. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran. My vision blurred. My legs burned. I just ran until I saw it, the parking lot. My truck. I stumbled towards it, barely able to breathe. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it. I looked up. He was standing at the edge of the trees, watching. I turned the key, the engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I just drove. I never went back, and I never will. I had been planning the trip for weeks. A solo hike deep into the forest, off the beaten path, away from the noise of the world. I had done solo hikes before, but this one was different. It was remote, isolated, the kind of place where no one would hear you if something went wrong. And yet, that was part of the appeal. I parked my truck at the trailhead early in the morning. The air was crisp, the sun just beginning to rise over the tree line. I double-checked my gear, tent, sleeping bag, extra layers, plenty of food, a first aid kit, and my knife. I carried a GPS and a map, even though I knew how unreliable signals could be out here. With one last glance at the empty parking lot, I adjusted my pack and stepped onto the trail. The first few miles were easy. A well-worn path, soft earth beneath my boots, the sound of birds overhead. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. By noon, I had veered off the main trail, navigating through dense forest. This was where the real adventure began. I moved carefully, following the terrain, making note of landmarks so I could find my way back. The trees were old here, towering, their branches creating a thick canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The deeper I went, the more unnatural the silence felt. It wasn't just the absence of people, it was the absence of sound. No birds, no rustling leaves, just my own footsteps crunching on the forest floor. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. Maybe the birds had settled somewhere else. Maybe the wind had simply died down. I pushed forward. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing, a flat, open space surrounded by thick trees. It was the perfect spot to set up camp. I dropped my pack, stretched my legs, and got to work. The tent went up easily. I gathered firewood, stacked it neatly, and set up a small fire pit. I was efficient, focused, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Something was off. It started with the trees. They were too uniform, too straight, almost like they had been planted. The bark was stripped in places, long claw-like marks raking down their trunks. No sign of animal activity. No nests, no burrows. Just the trees, standing like silent sentinels. I forced myself to shake off the unease. I built a fire as the sun started to set, watching the flames flicker, feeling the warmth seep into my skin. I ate a quick meal, then sat back, listening to the crackling wood. The silence was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, my own heartbeat. It was unsettling. That night, I barely slept. I woke up to a sound, a dull, rhythmic thudding. It was distant but steady, like someone was chopping wood. I checked my watch, 3:12 a.m. Who the hell would be out here at this hour? I held my breath, listening. The sound continued for a while, then stopped abruptly. I strained my ears, waiting, but there was nothing, just silence. I told myself it was my imagination, maybe a falling branch, maybe an animal knocking something over. I forced myself to lie back down, but sleep didn't come easily. By morning, everything felt normal again. The sun filtered through the trees, the fire had burned down to embers. I shook off the night's unease, packed up my camp, and pressed on. I hiked for most of the day, covering good ground. The terrain became rougher, the trees denser. I had to navigate carefully, using my compass to stay on course. But that feeling, that nagging unease never left. I was being watched, couldn't shake it. That evening, I found another clearing and set up camp again. As I ate my meal, I noticed something in the distance, a structure barely visible through the trees. My heart skipped. There shouldn't be anything out here. No cabins, no old ranger stations, just wilderness. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to keep my distance. But curiosity got the better of me. I approached cautiously. The structure was old, weathered. A small wooden shack, half hidden by overgrown brush. The door was slightly ajar, hanging crookedly on its hinges. Something about it felt wrong. The wood was splintered, clawed at, like the trees I had seen earlier. There were no signs of recent human activity. No footprints, no trails leading to or from it. I peered inside. Empty. A single wooden chair, a table covered in dust. The air smelled stale, like rot. And then I saw them, scratches on the walls, deep gouges. Words, carved hastily, desperate. It sees, it hears, comes at night. A chill ran down my spine. I turned back, walking quickly toward my camp. I felt exposed, like something was watching from the trees. I forced myself to keep calm, to move steadily. That night, I kept the fire going. I held my knife close, my ears strained for any sound. And then it came, the same rhythmic thudding, closer this time, more deliberate. I gripped my knife, my heart pounded. I wanted to believe it was just a tree creaking, an animal moving through the brush. But deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, watching, waiting. The sound continued for what felt like hours. I barely breathed, and then, just before dawn, it stopped. The forest was silent again. As soon as the sun was up, I packed my gear and started hiking back the way I came. I moved quickly, covering miles without stopping. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my truck, my hands were shaking. I threw my pack into the back, climbed in, and locked the doors. As I pulled out of the lot, I saw something in the trees. A figure, still, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I never went back. I had been planning the hike for weeks. The trail was deep in the woods, an old logging road that had been abandoned decades ago. It wasn't on any official maps, but I had found it mentioned in a few online forums. The people who had hiked it talked about how quiet it was, how you could go all day without seeing another person. That was exactly what I wanted. Just me, the trees, and miles of untouched wilderness. I parked my car on the side of a gravel road near the trailhead. There was no sign, just a narrow path leading into the dense forest. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. The sun was high, but the canopy overhead filtered the light, casting everything in a soft green glow. I shouldered my pack, checked my GPS, and started walking. The first few miles were easy. The path was wide, the ground mostly level. Birds chirped overhead, and I could hear the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush. I settled into a steady rhythm, breathing in the fresh air, enjoying the feeling of being completely alone. After about an hour, the trail narrowed. Thick undergrowth encroached on both sides, and fallen branches littered the ground. It was clear that not many people had been through here recently. That was fine with me. I pushed forward, stepping carefully over roots and rocks, listening to the steady crunch of my boots on the dirt. A few miles in, I reached a fork. My GPS showed both paths leading deeper into the woods, but one was marked as the original logging road while the other was an offshoot that eventually reconnected. The main road looked more overgrown, so I took the offshoot. It wound uphill, cutting through dense clusters of trees. The air was still unnaturally so. I stopped and listened. No birds, no wind, just silence. I kept walking. The climb was slow and steady. I checked my GPS again. It showed me right on the trail, everything as expected. But something felt off. The deeper I went, the more I noticed the trees. They were tall and old, but some of them had deep gashes in their bark. Not from animals. These were long, straight cuts, as if made by a blade. I ran my fingers over one of them. The wood beneath was dry. Old marks. Probably from the loggers, I told myself. I moved on. An hour later, I found the first sign that something was wrong. A boot print. It was fresh, deep in the mud, but something about it wasn't right. It was too wide, the heel too square. Not a hiking boot. More like a work boot, the kind you'd see on a construction site. I looked around, but there was no one, just the trees towering and still. I kept moving. The path started to descend, winding through a rocky section with sharp drops on either side. I moved carefully, planting each step with precision. Then, ahead of me, I saw something hanging from a branch. A rope, frayed at the ends, swaying slightly despite the still air. It had been tied in a loop, a noose. I stopped. My chest tightened. I turned around. I wasn't going to keep going. Whatever this place was, I didn't want to be here anymore. I started back the way I came, walking faster than before, trying to push down the unease in my stomach. Then I saw another boot print, next to mine. I stopped so fast I nearly lost my footing. I stared at the ground, at the deep imprint in the mud right beside my own. It hadn't been there before. My breath caught in my throat. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees, the underbrush, the shadows stretching long in the fading light. I saw nothing, heard nothing. I moved faster. The woods felt different now. The trees seemed closer together. The air felt thicker. I checked my GPS. The screen glitched, the signal weak. My battery was lower than it should have been. I cursed under my breath and kept going. The boot prints followed me. I saw them every few minutes, always fresh, always beside or behind mine. My pace quickened. My breathing grew shallow. The sun was getting lower. I should have been back to the main trail by now. Something was wrong. Then I smelled it. Rot. A deep, stomach-turning stench of decay. I covered my nose and kept moving, but the smell only grew stronger. Flies buzzed somewhere nearby. Then I saw it. A deer, or what was left of one. It had been gutted, its ribcage spread open, the meat stripped clean. But it wasn't just that. The carcass had been arranged, the bones stacked in a careful pattern. Symbols I didn't recognize had been carved into its skull. My stomach turned. I backed away, my foot snapping a branch. The sound echoed through the silent woods. Something moved behind me. I spun, heart hammering. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But I knew I wasn't alone. I ran. Branches slapped my face. Thorns ripped at my clothes. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I just ran. Then I saw it, the fork in the trail. Relief surged through me. I was almost out. I sprinted down the main path, barely noticing the way the trees seemed to open up, the air growing lighter. When I reached my car, I didn't stop. I threw open the door, started the engine, and sped down the gravel road without looking back. I didn't check my GPS until I was miles away. When I did, my stomach dropped. The map showed my route, except I hadn't been on the marked trail. Somewhere along the way, I had veered off, deeper into the woods. But I hadn't left the path. I knew I hadn't. I don't know who or what was out there, but I do know one thing. I wasn't supposed to find that place. And whoever was watching me didn't want me to leave. I never liked hiking alone, but that day I had no choice. My friends had backed out last minute, and I had already driven 3 hours to get to the trailhead. I told myself I'd be fine. I had done hikes longer and harder than this one before. It was an out-and-back trail, around 12 miles total, leading up to a scenic overlook. A well-marked path, no complicated navigation, and a forecast promising clear skies. I had my pack stocked with enough food, water, and supplies for the day. I even had a personal locator beacon in case something went really wrong. But the thing about bad situations is that they never feel bad at first. It always starts with small things, little mistakes that don't seem like a big deal until you're too far in to turn back. The first half of the hike was fine. I took my time, enjoying the quiet. The further I went, the fewer people I saw. After the first few miles, I stopped seeing anyone at all. It was late in the season, early October, so the crowds were minimal. Leaves covered the trail, damp from recent rain, but the air was crisp, and the views were worth the effort. I reached the overlook around noon. It was a small clearing at the top of a ridge, giving me a perfect view of the valley below. The wind was stronger up there, rustling through the trees, making the branches creak. I sat on a rock, ate my lunch, and took a few photos. It felt good to rest my legs after the climb. But as I sat there, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a creeping sensation, like the forest had gone too quiet. No birds, no rustling from small animals in the underbrush, just the wind. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just overthinking things. I didn't linger long. I packed up my things, checked the time, and started my descent. The first mile or so was easy. I moved at a steady pace, retracing my steps down the trail. The sun was still high, and I figured I'd be back at my car well before dark. Then I took a wrong turn. I didn't realize it at first. The trail had been covered in leaves the whole way, and I must have missed a marker. It wasn't until the path started sloping downward more steeply than I remembered that I hesitated. But by then, I had already walked at least half a mile. I stopped and looked around. The trees all looked the same. The ground was uneven, scattered with rocks and roots. The trail, if I could even call it that, was barely visible now. I hadn't seen a single trail marker in a while. I pulled out my phone. No service. Not surprising, but still frustrating. I checked my GPS, hoping it would show me the way back. The blue dot flickered on the screen, bouncing slightly before settling in a spot that didn't make sense. It showed me completely off the trail, deep in the woods. I frowned. That couldn't be right. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. I just needed to retrace my steps. But when I turned around, I realized I wasn't sure which way I had come from. The leaves had covered my footprints, and the ground looked the same in every direction. I picked the direction I thought felt right and started walking. My pace quickened, my breathing heavier than before. After 10 minutes, nothing looked familiar. My GPS still insisted I was nowhere near the trail. I tried to stay logical. I wasn't lost, not really. If I kept heading in one direction, I'd eventually hit a road or another trail. The mountains weren't endless, but the more I walked, the more uneasy I felt. The trees pressed in around me, their trunks dark and damp. The wind had died down and everything felt still. Then I heard it, a sound in the distance, something moving through the underbrush. I stopped, listened. Silence. It was probably a deer or a bear, though I hadn't seen any signs of one. I kept walking, picking up my pace, but a few minutes later, I heard it again, closer this time, a soft, deliberate crunch of leaves. Not an animal crashing through the brush, something slower, heavier. I turned quickly, scanning the trees. Nothing, just endless woods stretching in every direction. I kept moving, faster now, my breath coming shorter. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was working myself up over nothing. I wasn't lost. I wasn't being followed. I just needed to stay focused. Then I saw something ahead, a structure barely visible through the trees. A small, weathered wooden shed, standing alone in the middle of the forest. It made no sense. There shouldn't have been anything out here. No cabins, no shelters, nothing. My gut told me to stay away, but my brain argued back. Maybe it was an old ranger station. Maybe there was a map inside, something to help me find my way back. I hesitated, then stepped closer. The shed was old. The wood was gray and rotting, the door slightly ajar. I reached out, pushed it open. Inside, it was empty. Dirt covered the floor, and the smell of damp would fill the air. No tools, no maps, nothing useful. Just a small, dark space that felt wrong. I backed away, suddenly wanting to get as far from it as possible. Then I saw the footprints, fresh, leading from the trees to the shed. Not mine. Someone had been here. Recently. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned and walked away quickly, resisting the urge to run. I needed to get out of here. Now, I kept moving, my legs aching, my throat dry. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I just needed to put distance between me and that shed. I didn't stop until I saw something ahead. A road. Relief hit me like a wave. It wasn't the trailhead, but it was something. A narrow, cracked road, barely maintained, but it meant civilization was close. I stepped onto the pavement and looked both ways. No cars, no signs, just an empty road stretching into the distance. I picked a direction and started walking. After about 20 minutes, I heard a sound behind me. An engine, a truck, old and rusted, coming up the road. I hesitated. The truck slowed as it reached me. The driver was a man, middle-aged, wearing a faded baseball cap. He leaned out the window. "You lost?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. My instincts screamed at me to be careful. "I just need to get back to the main road," I said finally. He nodded. "I can take you." I hesitated. Then I saw something in the back of his truck. A backpack, torn, faded red, just like mine. My stomach turned. I forced a smile. "Actually, I think I'll just keep walking." His face didn't change. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, without another word, he drove off. I didn't stop walking, not for a second. I kept going until I saw another car. A small sedan, an older couple inside. I flagged them down, and they gave me a ride back to the trailhead. I never reported what happened. What would I even say? That I got lost, found a shed, and saw a truck with a backpack that looked like mine? That I felt something was wrong? I don't hike alone anymore. I don't go off trail. And I never ignore my instincts. Because I know now, sometimes being lost isn't the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes finding the wrong thing is. I started my hike early in the morning, just after sunrise. The air was crisp, and the sky was a perfect shade of blue, the kind that only lasts for a few hours before the sun starts to beat down. My backpack was loaded with the essentials: water, a few protein bars, a map, a small first aid kit, and a knife. I liked to be prepared. The trail I was on was remote, miles away from any town, winding deep into the forest, where cell service was non-existent. It was exactly what I wanted. Solitude, fresh air, and a good challenge. The first few miles were easy. The trail was well marked, the ground dry and solid. Birds chirped in the trees, and the occasional squirrel darted across the path. Felt peaceful. I had done hikes like this before, so I knew the routine. Keep a steady pace, take breaks when needed, and don't push too hard too early. About 5 miles in, I reached a fork in the trail. The left path was the main route, well-traveled and wide. The right path was narrower, more rugged, and appeared less maintained. It wasn't on the map I had. Something about it intrigued me. I had enough supplies and experience to handle a little detour. At first, it wasn't much different from the main trail, just steeper and more overgrown. I climbed over fallen logs, ducked under low-hanging branches, and kept an eye out for loose rocks. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The birds weren't singing anymore. The wind barely rustled the leaves. It felt off, but I pushed forward, convincing myself it was just my imagination. An hour passed, and the trail started to fade. Grass and weeds grew over it, and it was clear no one had been this way in a long time. I thought about turning back, but I could see an opening up ahead, a break in the trees where the sun was shining through. It looked like a clearing, and I figured it would be a good place to rest before heading back. When I stepped into the clearing, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a meadow or a scenic overlook. It was a campsite, an old one. There were rusted tent poles sticking out of the ground, shredded pieces of tarp caught in the bushes, and a fire pit filled with nothing but ash and broken glass. It had been abandoned for a long time. I looked around, taking cautious steps. There were signs that someone had stayed here, but what bothered me was the way it was left. It wasn't packed up and cleaned like a normal campsite. It was as if whoever had been here had left in a hurry, leaving behind trash, torn sleeping bags, and even a backpack half-zipped, its contents spilling onto the dirt. I crouched near the fire pit and picked up an old, faded water bottle. The label was peeling, and the plastic was brittle. It must have been there for years. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye, a shoe, lying near the edge of the clearing. It wasn't old and weathered like everything else. It was modern, like something you'd buy from a hiking store today. And it was clean, too clean. A chill ran down my spine. If this place had been abandoned for years, then why was there a shoe here that looked like it had just been left? My instincts screamed at me to go, to get back to the main trail as quickly as possible. I retraced my steps, moving faster than before. But something felt different. The trail didn't look the same. I was sure I had come from the north side of the clearing, but now it all looked unfamiliar. Trees that I didn't recognize, rocks I hadn't stepped over before. It didn't make sense. I wasn't lost. I knew how to navigate, but something was wrong. The silence was even heavier now. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breathing. I kept walking, following the direction I thought I had come from, but the farther I went, the more I realized I wasn't getting anywhere. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, not mine. I froze, straining my ears. The sound was faint, distant, but unmistakable. Someone or something was moving through the trees. I turned slowly, scanning the forest. Nothing, just endless trees and shadows stretching across the ground. I started walking again, faster now. The footsteps followed. I stopped. They stopped. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. My mind raced through possibilities. An animal? Another hiker? A trick of the wind? But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone was out there, watching me, following me. I reached into my backpack and gripped the handle of my knife. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I picked up the pace, pushing forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to find my way back before dark. The footsteps continued, always just far enough away that I couldn't see who or what it was. My breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. I was sweating despite the cool air. I kept moving, ignoring the burning in my legs, refusing to look back. Then I saw it, the fork in the trail. Relief flooded through me. I had made it back. Without hesitation, I sprinted down the main path, not stopping until I was miles away from that cursed place. By the time I reached my car, the sun had set and my legs were shaking. I threw my backpack inside, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened. I didn't know who or what had been following me. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I would never take an unknown trail again. I parked my truck at the trailhead, checking the time on my phone. It was just afternoon. I had planned to start earlier, but the drive took longer than expected. The lot was empty except for an older sedan parked near the edge. I double-checked my gear, water, a few protein bars, flashlight, extra socks, and my small first aid kit. The sky was overcast, but the weather forecast had called for nothing worse than a light drizzle later in the afternoon. I figured I had plenty of time to make the loop and get back before dark. The trail started out easy, a well-worn dirt path winding through dense trees. The smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air. Birds chirped overhead, and a light breeze rustled the leaves. It was peaceful, exactly why I had come. I had been feeling restless lately, stuck in a routine. A solo hike seemed like the perfect way to clear my mind. A couple of miles in, the path got steeper. My thighs burned a little as I climbed, but I welcomed the challenge. The forest was thick, the trees pressing in on both sides. I had been hiking for about an hour when I reached a fork in the trail. One path was the main route, a clear and well-maintained trail leading up toward a ridge. The other was narrower, almost hidden by overgrown bushes. A wooden sign stood between them, but the lettering was too faded to read. I had read about an old logging trail somewhere in this area. I figured this was probably it. My curiosity got the better of me. It looked like it hadn't been used in a long time, but the map I had downloaded showed it reconnecting to the main loop farther ahead. I decided to take it. The air felt cooler as I walked the narrower path. The trees here were taller, their thick branches blocking most of the daylight. The ground was damp, and I had to watch my step to avoid slipping on the exposed roots and wet leaves. I walked for another 30 minutes, stopping once to take a sip from my water bottle. That's when I noticed how quiet it had become. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I told myself it was normal. Sometimes animals went quiet when they sensed a larger predator. Maybe there was a bear nearby, though I hadn't seen any signs of one. I kept walking, moving slower now. The trail was getting harder to follow, the bushes and undergrowth thicker. I checked my phone. No service. That wasn't surprising this deep in the woods, but it made me feel a little uneasy. After another 10 minutes, the path became nearly impossible to see. It was just damp earth and scattered leaves now. I pulled out my map again, frowning. The logging trail should have met back up with the main path by now. Either I had misjudged the distance, or I had taken a wrong turn. I turned around to head back the way I had come. The trail was gone. I stared at the thick trees and tangled underbrush. My footprints were barely visible in the damp earth, quickly fading. I turned in a slow circle, heart pounding. I wasn't lost. Couldn't be. I had just walked this way. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I knew the best thing to do was retrace my steps carefully. I walked in what I thought was the right direction, but the trees all looked the same. 5 minutes passed, then 10. My stomach tightened. The forest felt different now, the trees pressing in closer, the silence heavier. I tried to follow the slope of the land, knowing the main trail had been higher up. But no matter which way I went, everything looked unfamiliar. My breathing grew shallow. I was lost. I pulled out my phone again, hoping for even a single bar of service. Nothing. I glanced at the sky through the trees. The light was fading. I had wasted too much time already. I needed to find higher ground. If I could get to an open area, I might spot the main trail or at least get my bearings. I pushed forward, climbing over fallen logs and pushing through thick underbrush. My legs burned, and sweat dripped down my back despite the cool air. Then I saw it, a break in the trees ahead. Relief flooded through me. I hurried toward it, stepping out into a small clearing, and stopped cold. In the center of the clearing was an old, rusted pickup truck. The windows were shattered, the tires flat, and the metal was eaten away by years of exposure. It looked like it had been sitting there for decades. My pulse pounded in my ears. There were no roads nearby, no trails wide enough for a vehicle. How had it gotten here? I took a slow step closer. The driver's side door hung open, the interior dark and empty. The air smelled stale, like damp wood and rust. My gut told me to leave, to turn around and keep moving, but I forced myself to check inside. Maybe there was something useful. The seats were torn, the dashboard cracked. On the passenger seat, half buried in leaves and dirt, was an old, water-damaged notebook. I picked it up carefully, flipping it open. The pages were mostly unreadable, the ink smeared, but one sentence stood out, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Don't go back the way you came." A chill ran down my spine. I snapped the notebook shut and dropped it. My mouth was dry. I turned, scanning the trees, suddenly feeling exposed. I needed to get out of here. I didn't care which direction, as long as it led me away from this place. I forced myself to move, picking a direction and walking quickly, heart hammering. The forest felt different now, the silence unnatural. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look back. Then I heard it, a rustling in the trees behind me. Not the wind, not an animal, something deliberate. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. I tore through the trees, branches scratching my arms and face. I didn't care. I just ran. My breath came in ragged gasps. I stumbled, caught myself, kept going. The forest blurred around me, my only focus on moving forward. Then suddenly, I broke through the trees onto solid ground. A trail. The main trail. I nearly collapsed in relief. I recognized this spot. My truck was only a mile away. I forced myself to keep going, walking as fast as my shaking legs would allow. The entire time, I felt something just beyond the trees, watching. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. My hands were trembling as I started the engine. I peeled out of the lot, not looking back. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not for a long time, but I never hiked alone again. I started my hike early, just after sunrise. The sky was a deep blue, streaked with the last wisps of dawn's pink and orange. My backpack felt heavy on my shoulders, packed with everything I thought I'd need. Water, snacks, a first aid kit, an extra jacket, and a map. I liked hiking alone. It gave me time to think, to clear my head, and just be away from everything. There was something about being deep in the woods, where the only sounds were my footsteps, the rustling leaves, and the occasional distant call of a bird. It made me feel small, but in a good way. The trail I chose wasn't a popular one. I had looked it up the night before and found very little about it online. Just a few mentions of it being rough and lightly trafficked. That was fine with me. I wanted solitude. It was supposed to loop around a mountain ridge and bring me back to my car in about 6 or 7 hours. A long hike, but manageable. I had done longer ones before. The first couple of miles were easy. The trail was narrow but well-defined, winding through dense trees that blocked out most of the sun. It was peaceful. Every so often, I'd stop and take a deep breath, just enjoying the smell of damp earth and pine. The ground was soft under my boots, covered in fallen leaves and patches of moss. I was making good time when I noticed the first thing that felt off. The forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots. At first, I didn't think much of it. Animals go silent sometimes. Maybe a predator was nearby, though I hadn't seen any signs of one. I kept walking, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. A few minutes later, I came to a fork in the trail. I pulled out my map. According to it, I was supposed to go left. The right path wasn't even marked. It looked like an old, overgrown logging road, barely a trail at all. I hesitated for a second, staring down both paths. Something about the unmarked path made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to close in around it, or how the ground was uneven and broken, like no one had walked it in years. I shook off the feeling and took the left path, just like the map said. The trees grew denser, and the trail became steeper, winding upward toward the ridge. I had to slow my pace, watching my footing on the loose dirt and scattered rocks. My legs burned, but I welcomed the effort, kept my mind busy. An hour later, I reached a clearing near the ridge. The view was incredible, rolling hills stretching out beneath me, covered in endless green. I took a break, sitting on a flat rock and drinking from my water bottle. A breeze rolled through, cooling the sweat on my skin. For the first time since the silence in the woods, I felt at ease again. That didn't last long. As I stood up to continue my hike, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Not mine. They were faint, half erased by time and weather, but they were there, and they were fresh. The thing was, they didn't come from the direction of the trail. They came from the unmarked path, the one I had decided not to take. I stared at them for a long time, my mind racing. There was nothing immediately wrong with seeing other footprints on a trail, but something about them felt off. They were deep, like whoever left them was carrying something heavy. and they weren't going in both directions. Only one way, toward the ridge. I told myself it didn't matter. Someone had been here before me. So what? Maybe a hunter, maybe another hiker who knew the area better than I did. I shook it off and kept walking, telling myself I was being paranoid. The trail led back into the trees, and soon I was descending the other side of the ridge. It was steeper here, the path rougher. I had to move carefully, testing each step before putting my full weight down. One wrong move and I'd go sliding down the hill. That's when I saw it. A backpack. It was off to the side of the trail, half hidden by undergrowth. Faded blue, torn in places. I stopped in my tracks. The uneasy feeling from earlier came back full force. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The bag was old, weathered by time and the elements. Zippers rusted, fabric stiff. Whoever left it here hadn't come back for it. I nudged it with my boot, hesitating before crouching down to check inside. Clothes, first aid kit, an empty water bottle, a map, faded and barely readable. No wallet, no ID, no sign of who it belonged to. I stood up fast, suddenly feeling exposed. Someone had been here before me, and they had left in a hurry. I scanned the trees, half expecting to see someone watching me. But there was nothing, just the trees, silent and still. I told myself to keep moving. The sooner I was back to my car, the better. The next few miles were a blur. I moved fast, barely stopping to catch my breath. The trees felt closer, the air heavier. Every so often, I swore I heard something behind me. A rustle, the snap of a branch. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Then I saw it, the footprints again. But this time they were ahead of me, deep, fresh, and going in the same direction I was. I stopped cold. My chest felt tight. Someone was here, and they weren't far. I listened, held my breath. The silence was crushing. Then the sound, a single footstep, off the trail, close. I ran. I didn't care about the rough terrain, the steep drop-offs, or the burning in my legs. I just ran. Branches whipped at my arms. Rocks slipped under my boots, but I didn't stop. My only thought was getting back to my car. When I finally broke through the tree line and into the small dirt lot where my car was parked, I nearly collapsed. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking, heart pounding. I didn't look back as I threw open the door and jumped in, slamming the locks down before I even caught my breath. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the trailhead, waiting, watching. Nothing came out of the woods. I left and never went back, and I never found out who else had been there that day. I don't want to. I started my hike early, just after sunrise. The sky was a deep blue, streaked with the last wisps of dawn's pink and orange. My backpack felt heavy on my shoulders, packed with everything I thought I'd need. Water, snacks, a first aid kit, an extra jacket, and a map. I liked hiking alone. It gave me time to think, to clear my head, and just be away from everything. There was something about being deep in the woods, where the only sounds were my footsteps, the rustling leaves, and the occasional distant call of a bird. It made me feel small, but in a good way. The trail I chose wasn't a popular one. I had looked it up the night before and found very little about it online. Just a few mentions of it being rough and lightly trafficked. That was fine with me. I wanted solitude. It was supposed to loop around a mountain ridge and bring me back to my car in about 6 or 7 hours. A long hike, but manageable. I had done longer ones before. The first couple of miles were easy. The trail was narrow but well-defined, winding through dense trees that blocked out most of the sun. It was peaceful. Every so often, I'd stop and take a deep breath, just enjoying the smell of damp earth and pine. The ground was soft under my boots, covered in fallen leaves and patches of moss. I was making good time when I noticed the first thing that felt off. The forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots. At first, I didn't think much of it. Animals go silent sometimes. Maybe a predator was nearby, though I hadn't seen any signs of one. I kept walking, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. A few minutes later, I came to a fork in the trail. I pulled out my map. According to it, I was supposed to go left. The right path wasn't even marked. It looked like an old, overgrown logging road, barely a trail at all. I hesitated for a second, staring down both paths. Something about the unmarked path made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to close in around it, or how the ground was uneven and broken, like no one had walked it in years. I shook off the feeling and took the left path, just like the map said. The trees grew denser, and the trail became steeper, winding upward toward the ridge. I had to slow my pace, watching my footing on the loose dirt and scattered rocks. My legs burned, but I welcomed the effort, kept my mind busy. An hour later, I reached a clearing near the ridge. The view was incredible, rolling hills stretching out beneath me, covered in endless green. I took a break, sitting on a flat rock and drinking from my water bottle. A breeze rolled through, cooling the sweat on my skin. For the first time since the silence in the woods, I felt at ease again. That didn't last long. As I stood up to continue my hike, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Not mine. They were faint, half erased by time and weather, but they were there, and they were fresh. The thing was, they didn't come from the direction of the trail. They came from the unmarked path, the one I had decided not to take. I stared at them for a long time, my mind racing. There was nothing immediately wrong with seeing other footprints on a trail, but something about them felt off. They were deep, like whoever left them was carrying something heavy, and they weren't going in both directions. Only one way, toward the ridge. I told myself it didn't matter. Someone had been here before me, so what? Maybe a hunter, maybe another hiker who knew the area better than I did. I shook it off and kept walking, telling myself I was being paranoid. The trail led back into the trees, and soon I was descending the other side of the ridge. It was steeper here, the path rougher. I had to move carefully, testing each step before putting my full weight down. One wrong move and I'd go sliding down the hill. That's when I saw it. A backpack. It was off to the side of the trail, half hidden by undergrowth. Faded blue, torn in places. I stopped in my tracks. The uneasy feeling from earlier came back full force. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The bag was old, weathered by time and the elements. Zippers rusted, fabric stiff. Whoever left it here hadn't come back for it. I nudged it with my boot, hesitating before crouching down to check inside. Clothes, a first aid kit, an empty water bottle, a map, faded and barely readable. No wallet, no ID, no sign of who it belonged to. I stood up fast, suddenly feeling exposed. Someone had been here before me, and they had left in a hurry. I scanned the trees, half expecting to see someone watching me. But there was nothing, just the trees, silent and still. I told myself to keep moving. The sooner I was back to my car, the better. The next few miles were a blur. I moved fast, barely stopping to catch my breath. The trees felt closer, the air heavier. Every so often, I swore I heard something behind me. A rustle, the snap of a branch. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Then I saw it. The footprints again. But this time they were ahead of me, deep, fresh, and going in the same direction I was. I stopped cold. My chest felt tight. Someone was here, and they weren't far. I listened, held my breath. The silence was crushing. Then the sound. A single footstep. Off the trail. Close. I ran. I didn't care about the rough terrain, the steep drop-offs, or the burning in my legs. I just ran. Branches whipped at my arms. Rocks slipped under my boots, but I didn't stop. My only thought was getting back to my car. When I finally broke through the tree-line and into the small dirt lot where my car was parked, I nearly collapsed. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking, heart pounding. I didn't look back as I threw open the door and jumped in, slamming the locks down before I even caught my breath. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the trailhead, waiting, watching. Nothing came out of the woods. I left and never went back, and I never found out who else had been there that day. I don't want to. I had planned the hike for months. It was supposed to be a solo trip, 3 days in the mountains, completely alone. I had done hikes like this before, but never in this area. It was more remote than I was used to, but that was the appeal. No tourists, no distractions. Just me and the wilderness. The first day went as expected. The trail was steep, winding through dense forest, then opening up to rocky ridges with sweeping views of the valley below. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, cool air, no sign of rain. I made good progress and set up camp near a small creek. The only sounds were the water flowing and the occasional rustling of leaves from a breeze or some small animal moving through the undergrowth. The second day was when things started to feel off. I woke up early, packed up, and continued hiking. The trail became less defined as I climbed higher, and the trees thinned out, replaced by more rocks and open ground. There was something unsettling about the area. I couldn't quite place it. It wasn't anything obvious. No strange noises, no signs of danger, just an eerie emptiness. I brushed it off, assuming it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Being alone for long stretches can do that. Around midday, I stopped to eat and checked my map. I had another few miles before reaching the next planned campsite, a flat plateau with a good vantage point. As I stood up to continue, I noticed something unusual, a faint trail leading off the main path. It wasn't on my map. It looked old, barely visible, like it hadn't been used in years. I felt a strange pull to follow it, curiosity getting the better of me. Maybe it led to a hidden viewpoint or an old hunting cabin. I had plenty of daylight left, so I decided to check it out. The trail twisted through thick brush, then opened up into a clearing. In the middle of it stood an old fire ring, stones blackened with age. Someone had camped here before, but it had been a long time. I looked around, expecting to see more signs of past campers. Maybe an old tent stake, a rusted can, something. But there was nothing, just the fire ring and the silence. The air felt heavier here. I can't explain it. It wasn't the altitude and it wasn't exhaustion. It was just different. Still, I pushed the feeling aside and took a few pictures before heading back to the main trail. I didn't want to fall behind schedule. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. They were fresh, pressed into the dirt. They came from the direction I had just come from. I stood there, heart pounding. Someone had walked behind me, but I hadn't heard a single sound. I looked around, scanning the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anyone. I crouched down, examining the prints. They were boot prints, similar to mine but slightly larger. I followed them with my eyes. They stopped a few feet from where I stood. There was no sign of them turning around, no indication of where the person had gone. It was like they just vanished. A chill ran through me. I wasn't alone. Someone was out here watching. I didn't waste any more time. I walked quickly back to the main trail, trying not to look over my shoulder too much. Every rustling branch, every shift of the wind felt wrong. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was an old print, and I just hadn't noticed it before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. By the time I reached my planned campsite, the sun was starting to set. I felt a little better being on higher ground, with a clear view of my surroundings. I set up my tent, made a small fire, and tried to shake the unease from earlier. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't an animal. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel outside my tent. My breath caught in my throat. I lay completely still, barely even breathing. The steps circled my tent once, then silence. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, ears straining for any noise. Nothing. No retreating footsteps, no movement, just silence. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted off because I woke up to the first light of dawn. My fire was cold, untouched. My gear was exactly where I had left it. If it weren't for the footprints I found outside my tent, I might have thought I had imagined it. I packed up fast. I wanted to get out of there. The plan was to finish the loop and be back at my car by late afternoon. I pushed hard, barely stopping to rest. But the feeling never left. That creeping sensation that I was being watched. followed. Then, about an hour from the trailhead, I saw it. Another footprint, fresh, and this time it wasn't just one. There were several, leading off the trail and into the woods. I didn't follow them. I didn't want to know. I practically jogged the last stretch, lungs burning, legs aching. When I finally reached my car, I threw my pack in the trunk, locked the doors, and sat there, heart pounding. I scanned the tree line one last time, half expecting to see someone step out. But there was nothing, just the trees, the wind, and that same eerie emptiness. I never went back to that trail, and I never will. I had always loved hiking alone. There was something about the quiet, the isolation, and the steady rhythm of my footsteps that gave me a sense of peace I couldn't find anywhere else. The world made sense out there. No traffic, no emails, no endless distractions. Just me and the land, stretching out in all directions. I had done plenty of day hikes and a few overnighters, but this time, I wanted to challenge myself. A 3-day solo trip deep into the wilderness, following an old, less traveled trail that snaked through the mountains. It wasn't marked on modern maps, but I had found it in an old guidebook at a used bookstore. The author described it as rugged and remote, but beautiful, exactly what I was looking for. The first day went smoothly. The air was crisp, the scent of pine thick around me, and the forest alive with distant bird calls and the rustling of unseen creatures. The trail was rough, overgrown in places but still visible. I kept a steady pace, stopping only for water and a quick lunch before pressing on. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing where I decided to set up camp for the night. The ground was soft, the trees provided good cover, and there was a small creek nearby for water. As the sun set, I built a small fire and cooked a simple meal. The night settled in around me, quiet except for the occasional rustling in the underbrush. I wasn't worried, small animals, maybe a deer moving through. I had camped alone before, and the sounds of the forest at night didn't bother me. After finishing my meal, I climbed into my tent, zipping it up tightly before slipping into my sleeping bag. Sleep came easily, but I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the forest was completely silent. Not even the chirp of a cricket. It was the kind of silence that felt wrong. I listened for a while, my breath slow and steady, but there was nothing, just my heartbeat, steady and deep in my ears. After a few minutes, I convinced myself I was overthinking it and forced myself back to sleep. The second day started well. I packed up my gear and hit the trail early, eager to make progress. The terrain grew steeper, the trees denser, and the trail more difficult to follow. I had to check my map frequently, making sure I was still on track. The old book warned about sections where the trail nearly disappeared, and it was right. At times, I had to backtrack, scanning the ground for any sign of where the path continued. Around midday, I found an old marker, just a wooden post, weathered and cracked, sticking out of the ground at an angle. It reassured me that I was still on the right path, even if it was hard to see. I pressed on, my legs starting to burn from the constant incline. The further I went, the more I realized how alone I was. I hadn't seen another person since I left my car at the trailhead. No footprints, no distant voices, no signs that anyone had been out here in a long time. The forest felt different here, darker, heavier. The trees pressed in closer, their branches thick overhead, blocking out much of the sunlight. The air smelled damp, earthy, with a faint metallic tang I couldn't quite place. I pushed the thought away and kept moving. By late afternoon, I started looking for a place to set up camp. The terrain wasn't as forgiving as the night before. Steep hills, thick underbrush, uneven ground. Eventually, I found a small flat area near a dry riverbed. It wasn't ideal, but it would do. I set up my tent, ate a quick meal, and settled in for the night. That feeling returned, the wrong kind of silence. I sat by the fire, listening, but there was nothing. No wind, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just my own breathing. I told myself it was just the depth of the wilderness. No roads, no people, just pure, untouched land. But something still felt off. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and tried to sleep. I drifted in and out, waking up several times to check my surroundings. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Sometime in the early morning, just before dawn, I woke up again. This time there was a sound, faint rustling, not wind, not an animal. It was slow, deliberate. My heart pounded. I stayed completely still, listening. The sound came again, closer. A footstep. I reached for my knife, gripping the handle tightly. My breath was shallow, my body tense. The footsteps moved closer, stopping just outside my tent. I could hear breathing low, steady. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My mind raced. Was it a person? An animal? Something worse? Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away. Slow at first, then fading into the distance. I stayed frozen, gripping my knife, listening until the sun started to rise. Only then did I unzip the tent, stepping out into the morning light. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no signs of anything moving through. But I knew what I heard. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking. The last day of the hike was supposed to take me deeper into the mountains before looping back, but I changed my plan. I was heading back the way I came. I needed to get out. The hike back was brutal. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like something watching me. I kept up a fast pace, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. By the time I reached the clearing where I had camped the first night, I was exhausted. That's when I saw it. A footprint, not mine. It was fresh, deep in the dirt, near where I had set up my tent 2 nights before. It was larger than my own, and the tread was different. Someone had been there. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I just kept moving. I reached my car just before sunset, my legs aching, my body running on pure adrenaline. I threw my gear inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. The sight of the empty parking lot sent a shiver through me. No other cars, no signs of anyone else. I pulled onto the road, driving faster than I should have, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. The woods blurred past me, dark and endless. I didn't slow down until I reached the highway, civilization returning in the form of streetlights and distant buildings. I never found out who or what was out there with me. I never went back to that trail. Some places aren't meant to be traveled alone. The plan was simple. I had a free weekend and wanted to clear my head. I had done solo hikes before, nothing extreme, just quiet trails where I could be alone with my thoughts. I picked a trail in the mountains, one I had read about online. It wasn't too long, just a loop, about 15 miles. It was supposed to take me through thick pine forests, past a few old logging roads, and up to a high point where you could see for miles. I started early in the morning, parked my car at the trailhead, checked my gear, and headed out. The first few miles were perfect. The sun was out, but it wasn't too hot yet. The air was crisp, carrying that fresh, woodsy smell of pine needles and damp earth. Birds were chirping, and for the first hour I felt great. But somewhere around mile 5, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The birds had stopped. No rustling in the underbrush, no squirrels chattering, just silence. I kept going, pushing it aside as paranoia, but the feeling stayed, like I was being watched. At mile 7, I came across an old logging road cutting through the trail. I checked my map. The road wasn't on it. I didn't think much of it. A lot of these old trails weren't well documented, and abandoned roads weren't unusual in areas like this. But something about it made me stop. The road was overgrown, barely visible, but it had fresh tracks, boot prints. Someone had been through here recently. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to follow the road or stick to my original route. In the end, I shook off the unease and stuck with my plan. I kept moving, but every so often I'd glance back. I don't know what I expected to see, but each time, I felt that creeping sensation get worse. At mile 10, I reached the high point. The view was stunning. Rolling hills stretching out for miles, untouched wilderness as far as I could see. But even there, something felt wrong. Then I saw it. Down in the valley, near where the trail looped back, was a small structure. A cabin or a shed. It wasn't on my map. Shouldn't have been there. Something about it made my skin crawl. I told myself it was just an old hunting cabin, nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew something was off. I started my descent. The closer I got to the valley, the heavier the air felt, like the atmosphere itself was pressing in on me. Then I smelled it. Rot. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding. It wasn't the smell of a dead animal. It was worse, stronger, human. Panic started creeping in. I wasn't armed. I had a small knife, but that wouldn't do much if I ran into trouble. I forced myself to move forward, but I kept my pace steady, careful. Then I saw the footprints again, fresh, leading off the trail, straight toward the cabin. I should have turned around. I should have backtracked the way I came. But I was already too deep in, and I didn't want to add extra miles to my trip. That was my mistake. I kept walking, forcing myself to ignore the smell. I was almost to the loop when I heard something behind me, a twig snapping. I whipped around. Nothing, but I knew someone or something was there. I picked up my pace. The loop would take me back toward my car. 3 more miles and I'd be out of here. Then, ahead of me just off the trail, I saw it. Pile of bones. Not animal bones. Human. My stomach dropped. The bones were stripped clean, piled haphazardly like someone had dumped them there. My breath came in short gasps. I turned to run. Then I heard it. Not an animal. Not the wind. A voice. Low. Whispering. Close. I didn't look back. I sprinted. The trail blurred beneath my feet. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But I kept going. I wasn't going to stop. Wasn't going to let whatever was back there catch me. The last mile was a blur of terror. I didn't stop until I saw my car. I fumbled for my keys, shaking so hard I dropped them. I snatched them off the ground, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. I locked the doors. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, trying to calm my breathing. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw something move in the trees. A figure, watching me. I didn't wait to see what it was. I started the car, slammed it into reverse, and tore out of there so fast I nearly ran off the road. I drove nonstop until I hit the main highway. I never reported what I saw. What would I even say? Hey, I found some bones and heard whispers in the woods. I checked the news for weeks after, looking for any reports of missing hikers, anything that might explain what I saw. Nothing ever came up. I don't hike alone anymore, and I never went back to that trail. Some places aren't meant to be explored. Some places don't want you there. And sometimes when you realize that, it's already too late. I started the hike early in the morning, just as the sun broke over the hills. The air was crisp, and the forest was still damp from the night's rain. My boots sank slightly into the softened dirt as I stepped onto the trail. It was supposed to be a straightforward hike, a loop through a section of national forest land that wasn't particularly remote but was still far enough from the city that I wouldn't run into many people. I liked it that way. Hiking alone gave me space to think, to clear my head. I had packed light. A small backpack with a hydration bladder, some protein bars, and a basic first aid kit. I had done hikes like this plenty of times before, and I wasn't worried. The first few miles were easy, the trail well marked. Birds chirped in the canopy above, and the occasional rustle in the undergrowth reminded me that I wasn't the only living thing out here. A couple of times, I spotted deer in the distance, watching me before bounding deeper into the woods. The feeling of being watched wasn't unusual. It happened sometimes when I hiked alone. Animals are curious, and I'd gotten used to it. About 5 miles in, the trail began to narrow. I knew this part of the loop wasn't as maintained as the beginning. Fallen branches crisscrossed the path, and in some places, I had to step over or around them. The incline was gradual but steady. I welcomed the challenge, feeling my legs start to burn as I pushed forward. The trail markers became less frequent, but I wasn't concerned. I had checked the route before I left, and I had a rough mental map in my head. An hour passed, maybe more. I checked my watch and estimated I was about halfway through. I stopped for a quick break, sitting on a fallen log to take a sip of water. The forest was quieter now. The morning birds had settled, and the wind had died down. The stillness was noticeable. I shrugged it off and continued on. The trail became harder to follow. The dirt path was now covered in damp leaves, making it difficult to distinguish where the trail ended and the forest floor began. I slowed down, scanning for any signs of the trail, old footprints, broken twigs, anything. Then I saw it, a tree with a faded trail marker. Relief washed over me, and I pressed forward. But after another few hundred feet, I hit a problem. The trail seemed to split, which I hadn't expected. One path sloped slightly downward, the other continued straight ahead. There were no markers to guide me. I hesitated. I had a gut feeling to go straight, so I did. I walked for another 10 minutes before realizing something was wrong. The path wasn't just overgrown. It felt like no one had walked it in years. I pushed forward a bit more, hoping to spot another marker. But nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees all looked the same, the terrain slightly different than I remembered from the map. I should have turned back then. Instead, I kept going. After another 20 minutes, I admitted it, I was lost. I pulled out my phone. No service. Not surprising, but frustrating. I had been in dead zones before, but I had always been able to find my way back to the trail eventually. I decided to backtrack. I turned around and started walking, but something felt off. The way back didn't look the same. I was sure I had followed a mostly straight path, but now it seemed like the trees had shifted. The more I walked, the more uncertain I became. I should have seen that fallen log I had stepped over earlier. I should have seen the tree with the faded marker, but there was nothing. Panic started creeping in. I stopped and forced myself to breathe. I wasn't that far off trail. I just needed to stay calm and keep moving. I tried to retrace my steps again, walking slower this time, looking for anything familiar. But the more I walked, the more disoriented I became. It was like the forest was shifting around me. Then I heard it, a snap, a branch breaking somewhere behind me. I froze, listening. Another snap, closer. My first thought was an animal, a deer, maybe even a bear. But it didn't sound like an animal moving through the underbrush. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned around quickly, scanning the trees. Nothing, just the thick forest. I listened for a few more seconds, then shook it off. Maybe a branch had fallen. Maybe I was just paranoid because I was lost. I kept walking. Then I heard it again. Closer. I spun around, heart pounding. Still nothing. The silence pressed in around me. My breathing was too loud now, and I forced myself to slow it down. I needed to think. I needed to focus. I decided to keep moving. If I was being followed, I didn't want to stand still. I picked up my pace, moving quickly but carefully, trying not to make too much noise. The underbrush was thicker here, and branches scratched at my arms. I didn't care. I just needed to find the trail again. Then, in the distance, I saw something. A structure. Relief flooded through me. It was small, maybe an old ranger station or a shed. It meant civilization. I hurried toward it, my boots crunching through the leaves. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't what I had hoped. It wasn't a ranger station. It wasn't even a shed. It was an old, abandoned cabin, half hidden by the trees. The wood was weathered and dark with age. The door hung slightly open, creaking in the light breeze. I hesitated. I didn't want to go inside, but I also didn't want to stay out in the open. If I was being followed, at least inside, I could get my bearings and figure out my next move. I stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under my weight. I pushed the door open slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Inside, it was empty. No furniture, no signs of recent activity. Just dust and scattered debris on the floor. But it was shelter. I moved to the far corner, crouching down to collect my thoughts. My mind raced through my options. I needed to stay put until I had a plan. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, right outside the cabin. I held my breath. The sound stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the forest was playing tricks on me. Then, through a crack in the wood, I saw movement, a shadow passing by the window. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my pack and bolted out the back door, running blindly into the woods. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to put distance between me and that cabin. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs ached. I didn't stop until I saw something that made me want to cry with relief. A trail marker, a real one, not faded, not hidden. I stumbled toward it, following the path until, finally, I found myself back on the main trail. I kept moving fast, never looking back. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't know how I got so turned around. But I do know this: I won't be hiking alone again. I had been planning this trip for months, waiting for the perfect weekend to head out into the mountains alone. The idea of hiking solo always appealed to me. No distractions, no one slowing me down, just me and the trail. I had done solo hikes before, but this was the most remote one yet. A 3-day trek through a dense forest, leading to an old fire lookout on the peak of a mountain. I set out early in the morning, my pack loaded with food, water, and gear. The first few miles were easy, the trail well-worn and lined with towering pines. Birds chirped, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. The air smelled fresh, clean, untouched. It was exactly what I needed. About 6 miles in, the trail started to narrow. The trees closed in, blocking much of the sunlight. The farther I went, the quieter it became. No more birds, no more rustling leaves, just the crunch of my boots on the dirt. It was eerie, but I pushed forward. By mid-afternoon, I reached a small clearing and decided to take a break. I sat on a fallen tree, ate a protein bar, and drank some water. My map showed I was making good time. The lookout was still a day's hike away, and there was a small lake marked about 2 miles ahead where I planned to camp for the night. As I started hiking again, something felt off. I couldn't pinpoint why, but my gut told me something wasn't right. The air felt heavier, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than usual. I told myself I was just being paranoid. It was probably the isolation getting to me. Then, about a mile from the lake, I noticed something odd. The trail ahead was disturbed. Fresh dirt overturned. Small branches snapped. It wasn't the usual wear from hikers. It looked deliberate, like something heavy had been dragged across the path. I stopped and examined the area. The marks led off into the trees, disappearing into the undergrowth. I stood there for a long moment, my mind trying to reason it out. Maybe a fallen tree had been moved, or an animal had dragged something. Still, I felt uneasy. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but I was too stubborn. I had planned this trip for months. I wasn't about to turn back now. I pressed on, reaching the lake just as the sun started dipping behind the trees. It was a beautiful spot, calm water reflecting the darkening sky, surrounded by dense forest. I set up my tent near the shoreline, cooked a quick meal, and sat by the water, watching the sky turn from orange to deep blue. The silence was unsettling. Even near water, there should have been sounds. Frogs, insects, something. But there was nothing. I tried to shake the feeling. I was alone in the wilderness. It was supposed to be quiet. That night, I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake, feeling like something was watching me. A few times, I swore I heard footsteps outside my tent, but when I listened closely, there was nothing. By dawn, I was exhausted but eager to get moving. I packed up quickly and continued toward the peak. The trail became steeper, winding through rocky terrain. As I climbed, I noticed something disturbing. More signs of disturbance. More dragged dirt, more broken branches. And then I saw it. A deep footprint in the mud, larger than my own, too large for any normal hiker. My stomach dropped. I crouched down, studying it. The edges were fresh. Someone, or something, had passed through here recently. I stood up and scanned the forest, my pulse hammering in my ears. Nothing moved. I told myself to keep going, to get to the lookout where I could have a clear vantage point. The final stretch was brutal. My legs burned. My breath came in gasps, but I pushed forward. When I finally reached the fire lookout, I felt a wave of relief. It was old but sturdy, standing tall above the trees. I climbed the wooden steps, my boots echoing in the silence. The door was unlocked. Inside, dust covered the wooden floor. Old maps and papers were scattered on a small desk. I dropped my pack, took a deep breath, and looked out the window. The view was incredible, endless forest stretching in every direction. But my relief was short-lived. On the floor near the far wall, something caught my eye. A sleeping bag. It was dirty, torn in places, and unzipped. Next to it, an empty water bottle and a rusted hunting knife. Whoever had stayed here left in a hurry. My chest tightened. I suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Then I saw the scratches on the doorframe. Deep gouges as if someone, or something, had clawed at the wood. I grabbed my pack, my heart racing. I needed to get out of there. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping on the last step. The forest suddenly felt darker, thicker. I moved fast, half running, half stumbling down the trail. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, not mine. I didn't look back. I ran, branches whipping against my face, my pack slamming against my back. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they'd give out. Then the trail widened and I saw it, my car. I had made it back to the trailhead. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking, and threw my pack in the back seat. As I started the engine, I finally looked back at the trail. Nothing. But I knew something had been out there, watching me, following me. I never went hiking alone again. I left my house early in the morning, the sky still holding onto the last bit of night. The air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up better than coffee. I had planned this hike for weeks, checking the weather, mapping out my route, and making sure I had enough supplies. I parked my truck at the trailhead, double-checking everything before locking up. My pack was heavy on my back, filled with water, food, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight. The sun was starting to rise as I stepped onto the trail, the golden light cutting through the trees. It was quiet, aside from the occasional bird call and the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. The first few miles were easy. The trail was well-marked, winding through dense woods and crossing over small streams. The further I went, the more peaceful it felt. No traffic noise, no people talking, just me and the sound of nature. It was exactly what I needed, a break from everything. About 3 hours in, I stopped for a quick snack near a small clearing. I sat on a fallen log, taking in the silence. There was something about being alone in the woods that made everything feel sharper. The way the leaves rustled, the distant sound of water moving over rocks, even the way my own breathing sounded. After a short rest, I got back on my feet and continued deeper into the forest. The trail became less defined, narrowing as the trees grew closer together. I checked my map, making sure I was still on track. Everything looked good. My goal was to reach a ridge that overlooked the valley, take in the view, then loop back down before sunset. As I hiked, I started noticing small things that felt off. The birds had stopped chirping. The wind had died down. Even the rustling leaves seemed to have gone still. It wasn't immediate, but a slow realization that I was surrounded by silence. A deep, heavy silence. I tried to shake it off. Sometimes the forest just got quiet. Nothing unusual about that. But then I started feeling it, that creeping sensation of being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see another hiker, maybe a deer, but there was nothing. Just trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. My pace quickened. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my body didn't believe it. Another hour passed. I should have been getting close to the ridge, but something was wrong. The trail was getting harder to follow. I checked my map again, pulling out my compass. Everything said I was going the right way, but the terrain wasn't matching what I expected. I kept going, hoping I'd spot a familiar marker, A large boulder, a fallen tree, anything, but all I saw was more forest. Then I saw it, a boot print in the dirt. Relief flooded through me. Someone else had been here, maybe even earlier today. I crouched down to take a closer look, but something felt off. The print was deep, heavier than a normal step, like someone had been dragging their feet. The edges weren't crisp, but slightly smudged. I looked around for more but didn't see any. Just that single, lonely print. I told myself to keep moving. If someone else had been through here, then I was still on some kind of trail. But the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. Another 30 minutes passed, and I had to accept it. I was lost. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. I still had daylight, plenty of water, and my gear. I pulled out my map again, trying to make sense of where I had gone wrong. My compass said I was heading north, which should have been correct, but nothing around me matched what the map showed. I decided to backtrack. It was the safest option. Follow my own footprints until I reached familiar ground. But as I turned around, I stopped. There was another boot print, right next to mine. I hadn't heard anyone, hadn't seen anyone, but there it was, fresh in the dirt, as if someone had been standing right behind me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I scanned the trees, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The forest was still silent, too silent. I wanted to call out, to ask if someone was there, but something deep inside me told me not to. I started walking, fast. My mind was racing through possibilities. Maybe a hunter, another lost hiker, but then why hadn't they said anything? Why was the print right next to mine? The trees blurred as I moved, my focus only on retracing my steps. I wasn't thinking about the view anymore. I wasn't thinking about finishing my hike. I just needed to get back. Then I saw it, my own footprints leading back the way I had come. Relief hit me like a wave. I was on the right track, but just as quickly, that relief turned to ice in my veins. There were more prints, not mine. They wove in and out of my trail, sometimes on top of my own, sometimes beside them. And they weren't just footprints, drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled through the dirt. I broke into a run. I didn't care if I was making noise anymore. My pack bounced against my back, branches whipped my face, but I didn't stop. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs screamed for air. I ran until I saw something familiar, the small clearing where I had stopped for a snack. I didn't stop. I kept moving, pushing myself forward. I wasn't thinking, just reacting. The truck. I needed to get to the truck. When I finally saw it, parked exactly where I had left it, I almost collapsed. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. I jumped in, slammed the door, and locked it. My breathing was ragged, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the trailhead, waiting, watching. Nothing moved, no sound, just the wind starting to pick up again, rustling the leaves like normal, like nothing had happened. I didn't stay to question it. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I peeled out of that parking lot faster than I ever had before. I didn't tell anyone what happened. What could I even say? That I got spooked? That I saw footprints that shouldn't have been there? No one would believe me, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt, and I haven't gone hiking alone since. I had planned this hike for months. The stretch of trail winding through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest had been on my bucket list for years. I wasn't new to hiking, but I wasn't an expert either, just someone who enjoyed being alone in the wilderness. There was something about the isolation, the quiet hum of the forest, the rhythmic crunch of boots against dirt, that felt like therapy. I needed this trip. Work had been draining me, and my personal life wasn't much better. A week alone in the wild sounded perfect. I started early in the morning. The first few miles were easy, the air crisp, the sun peeking through the canopy. The trail was well worn, familiar under my boots. I had studied the maps, packed everything I needed: food, water filter, emergency beacon, first aid kit. I wasn't reckless. I knew the dangers of solo hiking. I had told a few friends where I was going and when to expect me back. If something went wrong, they would know. About 10 miles in, I stopped for a break. I sat on a fallen log, pulled out a protein bar, and listened. Birds chirped. A soft breeze rustled the leaves. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet you don't get in the city. As I packed up to continue, I noticed something odd. A faint path leading off the main trail. It wasn't on my map. Probably just an old game trail, I told myself. Still, curiosity pulled at me. I decided to check it out. Just a quick look. Maybe it led to a good vantage point or a hidden stream. I had plenty of daylight left. The path was narrow, overgrown in spots, but easy enough to follow. I walked for maybe 15 minutes before I started feeling off. The air was different here, heavy. The forest seemed quieter. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my breathing and my footsteps. I stopped, scanning the trees. Nothing, just thick trunks and tangled underbrush. I shook it off and pressed forward. The path dipped into a small valley where the trees grew denser, their trunks twisting unnaturally. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling in my gut told me to turn back. I ignored it. Stupid. I kept going. Then I saw it. A small clearing up ahead. In the center stood an old, weathered structure. A cabin. No, not a cabin, just a skeleton of one. The roof had caved in, the walls barely standing. Moss and vines clung to the rotting wood. Something about it made my skin crawl. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I stepped closer, carefully, my boots crunching against dead leaves. I peered inside. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, rusted tools. A pile of animal bones in the corner. Probably just some predator's leftovers, I told myself. Then I saw the markings. Deep scratches on the doorframe, as if someone had clawed at it. My gut screamed at me to leave. I turned, ready to head back, when I heard it. A branch snapping. Not far. My breath caught. I scanned the trees, heart pounding. Nothing. But I wasn't alone. I moved fast, retracing my steps. The trail felt different, darker, like the trees had closed in. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something moving in the shadows. But there was nothing, just that heavy, suffocating silence. Then I saw it, my boot prints. But something was wrong. Right beside mine, overlapping them in places, were others. Bare footprints. Human. Panic hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had followed me. I picked up my pace, practically jogging now. My pulse hammered in my ears. I needed to get back to the main trail. Fast. I stumbled once, catching myself on a tree trunk. My breathing was ragged. Every instinct screamed that I was being watched. Hunted. I kept moving. Then I heard it again. A branch snapping. Closer this time. Too close. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I broke into a run. The forest blurred around me. My lungs burned. I hit the main trail and didn't stop. Not until I was miles away. Only then did I turn around. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. But I knew I had been followed. I made it back to my car just as the sun began to set. I threw my pack in the back seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking. I sat there for a long time trying to make sense of what had happened. I told myself it was just paranoia, just the isolation playing tricks on me. But I knew better. I haven't gone hiking alone since. The trail stretched ahead of me, a narrow dirt path winding through the dense forest. I had set out early that morning, determined to complete the full loop before sundown. The map said it was a 15-mile hike, challenging but manageable. I packed light, a water bottle, some protein bars, a knife, and a small first aid kit. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, cool breeze, the scent of pine thick in the air. The first few miles passed quickly. Birds called to one another in the branches above, and I occasionally spotted a squirrel or rabbit darting through the underbrush. The ground was uneven in places, with exposed roots and loose rocks, but nothing I couldn't handle. I moved at a steady pace, enjoying the solitude. After about 5 miles, the forest started to change. The trees grew closer together, their branches blocking more and more of the sunlight. The air smelled damp, the ground softer underfoot. I checked my watch just past noon. I had plenty of time to finish before dark. Still, something about the shift in atmosphere put me on edge. I shook off the feeling and kept walking. A couple of miles later, I came to a fork in the trail. I pulled out my map, tracing the paths with my finger. The left path was the official route, well-traveled and maintained. The right path was unmarked, a faint trail leading into the deeper forest. It wasn't on my map, but it looked like a shortcut. If it cut even a mile off my hike, I'd be back at my car sooner. I hesitated, then stepped onto the unmarked path. The moment I did, the forest seemed to go silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just my own footsteps crunching on twigs and damp earth. The path was narrow, barely more than a deer trail. I had to duck under low-hanging branches, stepping carefully to avoid hidden roots. My gut told me to turn back, but I ignored it. It was just a shortcut, nothing to worry about. After about half a mile, I realized the trail was fading. The dirt path was giving way to thick undergrowth, and soon I was stepping over fallen logs and pushing through ferns. I checked my watch. 1:30 p.m. I should have been close to linking back with the main trail by now, but there was no sign of it. I pulled out my map again, frowning. I had a bad habit of assuming I had a good sense of direction, but something felt off. I turned around, planning to backtrack, but the trail behind me didn't look familiar. Had I taken a wrong turn? No, I had followed a straight line. I was sure of it. I took a deep breath. No need to panic. I had plenty of daylight left. I turned back in the direction I thought the main trail should be and started walking faster. The trees were thick here, the ground covered in a layer of dead leaves that muffled my steps. I listened for the sound of running water. There was a creek near the main trail, according to my map. If I could find it, I could get my bearings. 15 minutes passed, then 30. My heart was beating faster now. The terrain was getting rougher, the land sloping upward. I was climbing without realizing it. That didn't make sense. The trail shouldn't have an incline like this. I paused, wiped sweat from my forehead. The air was stuffy, no breeze reaching me here. My water bottle was half empty. I took a sip, trying to think. I had my phone, but there was no service, no GPS, just endless trees in every direction. A snapping sound made me freeze. Not a twig breaking under my own foot. Something farther away. Something big moving through the brush. My breath caught in my throat. A bear? A deer? I scanned the trees, but I saw nothing. I moved slower now, more carefully. If it was a bear, I needed to stay calm. But the feeling in my gut told me it wasn't a bear. It was something else. Something watching me. Another snap. Closer this time. I turned sharply, my pulse hammering. Still nothing. Just trees and shadows. I forced myself to keep moving. The main trail had to be nearby. It had to be. The ground leveled out, but my relief was short-lived. The forest was denser now, the trees packed tightly together. I was sweating hard, even though the air was cool. My legs ached. I had been walking for hours now, and nothing looked familiar. And then I saw it. A backpack, old and torn, half buried under leaves. My stomach dropped. Someone else had been here before me, someone who had never made it out. I crouched down, hesitating before touching it. The fabric was weathered, the straps frayed. It had been here for a long time. I reached inside, my fingers closing around something hard. A water bottle, empty. A flashlight with corroded batteries. Phone dead. And then, at the bottom, a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I opened it. Do not follow the trail. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. The handwriting was messy, rushed. There was no name, no explanation, just that warning. My breathing was too loud, too fast. I forced myself to stand. I needed to get out. Now, I turned and started walking, faster now, my eyes darting around the trees. Another snap, closer. I broke into a run. Branches whipped against my arms, my legs. I didn't care. I just ran. I could hear something moving behind me, something keeping pace. My lungs burned. My legs screamed at me to stop, but I didn't. And then I saw it, a break in the trees, sunlight, the main trail. I burst onto the path, stumbling to a stop. My chest heaved. I turned, looking back into the trees. Nothing, just silent forest. I stood there for a long time, trying to slow my breathing. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. I didn't wait. I followed the main trail back, never looking back again. When I reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there, gripping the wheel. I don't know what was out there. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing. I'll never take a shortcut again. I had hiked plenty of trails before, but nothing serious. Day hikes, mostly. Well-marked paths with plenty of other hikers around. But this time, I wanted something different. I wanted real wilderness. I wanted to prove to myself that I could navigate without relying on other people. So, I picked a remote section of national forest that barely anyone hiked. I planned it out, mapped my route, packed my gear, even checked the weather. I thought I had everything under control. But nature doesn't care about your plans. I started early in the morning, parking my car on the side of a gravel road that cut through miles of dense pine forest. No official trailhead, no signs, just a spot where I could squeeze my car off the road without blocking anything. The air smelled like damp earth and pine sap, and the morning light filtered through the trees in long golden rays. Felt peaceful. I had my pack strapped tight, water bottles filled, a compass, a GPS, a physical map in case my phone lost service. I even had a whistle just in case. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't reckless. I was careful. The first few hours were perfect. The forest was quiet except for birds chirping and the occasional rustle of something moving through the underbrush. The deeper I went, the more the world outside seemed to disappear. No distant sounds of cars, no hum of power lines, nothing. Just me and the woods. I followed an old logging road for a while before cutting onto a smaller trail that was barely visible. Just an old footpath, probably used by hunters. It twisted and turned through thick trees, the kind that blocked out most of the sunlight. The ground was soft with pine needles, muffling my footsteps. It felt like walking through a tunnel, surrounded by walls of dark green. Then, somewhere along the way, I missed a turn. I didn't realize it at first. The path had been faint to begin with, so when it gradually faded out, I just figured it was getting overgrown. I kept going, thinking I'd pick it back up again. I checked my GPS. It still showed I was heading in the right direction. No problem, but the further I walked, the thicker the forest got. The trees pressed in, branches catching on my pack, roots snagging my boots. The ground sloped upward, forcing me to climb over fallen logs and loose rocks. My GPS still said I was on track, but something felt wrong. Then I looked down at the screen, and my heart sank. The little arrow that was supposed to show my location was frozen. I tapped the screen. Nothing. My GPS wasn't working. No big deal. I had my map and compass. I pulled them out, trying to match the terrain to what was on paper. But the forest all looked the same. The hills, the trees, the dry creek beds. It all blurred together. I turned around to backtrack, but after a few minutes, the trail was gone. Panic started creeping in. I told myself to stay calm. I wasn't lost. Not really. I just needed to keep moving in the right direction. I picked what I thought was the best route and started walking again. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, shadows stretching longer. My legs ached from climbing over rough terrain. I stopped to rest, taking a long drink from my water bottle. I wasn't in immediate danger. I still had food, still had water. I just needed to find a landmark. A hilltop, a stream, something I could match to my map. Then I heard something. First, I thought it was the wind. A distant sound, low and steady. But the more I listened, the less natural it sounded. It was rhythmic, a deep, pulsing thump, like the sound of something heavy hitting the ground over and over. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a tree creaking, maybe an animal moving through the brush. I kept walking, The sound followed me. Every time I stopped, it stopped. I walked faster, trying to ignore it, but my chest felt tight. My breathing was too loud. My heart beat too fast. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared, really scared. I kept moving, picking my way through the trees, trying to put distance between me and whatever was making that sound. The ground sloped downward, and I nearly lost my footing on loose dirt. At the bottom of the hill, I saw something through the trees, a clearing. Relief flooded through me. If there was a clearing, maybe there was a way out. I hurried toward it, pushing through thick brush. Then I saw what was in the clearing. A structure. Not a house, not a cabin. Just 4 wooden posts with a slanted roof, like an old hunting blind or an abandoned shelter. But it didn't look old. The wood wasn't rotting, and the roof was intact. Something was off about it. I stepped closer. The ground around it was disturbed, covered in deep gouges like something had been dragged through the dirt. The structure had no walls, just the posts and the roof. But hanging from the beams were thick ropes, tied into loops. Nooses, 5 of them swaying slightly in the breeze. The air felt heavier, like the forest itself was watching me. My skin prickled. My mouth went dry. I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run. Running meant panic. Panic meant mistakes. I needed to think. I needed to focus. I needed to get out of these woods. I pulled out my whistle and blew it, 3 sharp blasts. The universal distress signal. No answer. I walked faster, picking a direction and sticking to it. The sound was still behind me. Not the rhythmic thumping anymore, something else. Rustling, snapping branches, footsteps. I wasn't alone. I didn't stop to look. I just kept going, heart hammering, legs burning. The trees blurred together. The sky darkened. My water was almost gone. My legs felt like they were going to give out. Then finally I saw it. A road. Not the one I started on. But it didn't matter. It was a road. A way out. I stumbled onto the gravel, looking both ways. No cars. No signs. Just an empty stretch of road cutting through the forest. I followed it, forcing myself to keep moving. My boots scraped against the gravel, every step an effort. Then, in the distance, I saw something. A car. It was parked on the side of the road, just ahead. My heart leapt. Maybe someone was inside. Maybe I was finally safe. As I got closer, I saw it was empty. Then I saw something else. My car. It was my car, parked exactly where I left it that morning. I had been walking in circles. My legs nearly gave out. I didn't waste time thinking about it. I just fumbled for my keys, threw open the door, and started the engine. Gravel kicked up behind me as I sped away, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I didn't look back. I don't know how I ended up back at my car. I don't know who or what was in those woods with me. I just know I'll never go back. I parked my truck at the trailhead just as the sun was beginning to set. It wasn't my first solo hike, but this one felt different. The air was thick with humidity, and the woods seemed unusually quiet. I had planned this trip for weeks, wanting to challenge myself with an overnight hike deep into the national forest. The trail was marked but rarely traveled, stretching miles into the wilderness before looping back around. As I secured my pack and adjusted the straps, I noticed the absolute stillness. No birds, no rustling of leaves, just silence. Brushing off the unease, I started walking. The first few miles were easy. The trail was well maintained, though the deeper I went, the rougher it became. The towering trees blocked out the last of the daylight, and I pulled out my flashlight. My plan was to hike until I found a suitable clearing to set up camp. An hour passed, maybe 2. The deeper I got, the more disoriented I felt. I should have reached the marked clearing by now, but the trail seemed unfamiliar. I checked my GPS. It showed I was still on the path, but something felt off. The trees all looked the same, the terrain less predictable. My gut told me to turn back, but pride pushed me forward. Then, I found something strange. A boot. An old hiking boot, half buried in the dirt. It wasn't new, worn out, covered in moss, laces frayed. My stomach tightened. Someone had lost it a long time ago, but there were no signs of anyone around. No footprints, no gear, nothing. I moved on, trying not to let it bother me. An hour later, I still hadn't found a place to camp, but I stumbled upon something worse. Another boot, the match to the first one, sitting upright in the middle of the trail. I stopped. My breath came out in short bursts. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal had moved it. Maybe a hiker had dropped it. But then why was there no other sign of them? I scanned the area with my flashlight, but the woods were too dense to see far. I kept walking. By now, I was exhausted. I needed to set up camp soon. Pushing ahead, I found a small clearing just big enough for my tent. The moment I stepped into it, a strange sensation washed over me. It was as if the air was heavier here, but I ignored it, setting up my tent, unrolling my sleeping bag, and forcing myself to eat even though my stomach was twisted with anxiety. The night was long. Every small sound made my skin crawl. Twigs snapped in the distance. Leaves rustled without wind. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were dark, filled with shadows shifting in the trees. At some point, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Not the scurrying of an animal, these were deliberate, heavy. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I grabbed my knife and held my breath. The footsteps circled my tent, slow and steady. Then silence. I didn't move. I stayed like that until the first hint of dawn crept through the fabric of my tent. When I finally unzipped it, my breath caught in my throat. There were footprints around my tent. Bare, human footprints. I packed up in record time, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there. I didn't bother eating. I didn't even check my map. I just needed to go. The trail felt different now. It was the same path, but it felt wrong, like the woods had shifted overnight. I walked fast, my head swiveling at every noise. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shirt caught on a branch. It was faded, tattered. It had once been blue but was now nearly gray. Beneath it, a small pile of bones. I froze. The bones were old, but the way they were placed, almost arranged, it wasn't natural. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to move. I pushed forward, not caring about my aching legs or burning lungs. I needed to reach my truck. The path twisted and turned, and my heart sank when I realized I wasn't where I thought I should be. My GPS showed I was off course, but that didn't make sense. I had followed the same trail back. Then I saw them. More footprints. But this time, they weren't around my tent. They were following me. My chest tightened. Someone or something had been behind me this entire time. I started running. Branches whipped against my face. Rocks cut into my palms as I stumbled. The woods seemed endless. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not my own. Behind me, close. Too close. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the dirt road where my truck was parked. My hands fumbled for my keys. I barely got the door open before throwing myself inside and locking it. My heart pounded as I checked the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone or something standing at the edge of the trees. But there was nothing, just the empty woods. I didn't wait. I started the engine and tore out of there, not stopping until I reached town. I don't know what happened in those woods. I don't know whose footprints those were or who or what had been circling my tent. But I do know one thing. I'm never going back. I had been hiking alone for years. It wasn't about proving anything. I just liked the silence. No one to slow me down, no one to talk my ear off about nonsense, no one to ruin the quiet. Just me, my thoughts, and the miles ahead. That day was supposed to be a simple out-and-back trail, 12 miles round trip. I had done harder hikes. I had done longer hikes. But something about this one, from the moment I started, felt off. The morning was crisp, a perfect day for hiking. I parked at the trailhead just after sunrise, the lot nearly empty except for one other car. I checked my gear, water, snacks, extra layers, GPS, knife. The basics. I wasn't new to this. The first few miles were fine. The dirt trail wound through thick forest, the early morning light cutting through the branches. Birds chirped, the occasional squirrel rustled through the underbrush. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. Around mile 4, the trail split. My map and GPS showed only one main trail, but here there were two. One went the direction I expected. The other was narrower, less traveled, cutting off into the woods at a slight incline. No signs, no markers. It didn't make sense. I should have ignored it. I almost did, but my curiosity got the better of me. Maybe it was a shortcut or a reroute. Maybe the maps weren't updated. I decided I'd follow it for a bit just to see where it led. At first, it seemed like any other backcountry path. Tight, winding, slightly overgrown, but still walkable. It had footprints, though I couldn't tell how recent they were. The further I walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind through the trees, just my footsteps and my breathing. Then, I noticed the first sign something was wrong. The footprints ahead of me weren't going forward. They were coming back, and they were deep, uneven, like someone had been running. That was my first warning. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone got lost, turned around, ran back to the main trail. Maybe they got spooked by a bear or something. But as I kept walking, I started seeing more signs. Broken branches, disturbed dirt, scuff marks. Then the footprints stopped altogether, just vanished, like whoever was running had suddenly been lifted off the ground. I don't scare easy. I've run into bears before. I've been caught in storms, nearly slipped off ledges, had all kinds of bad luck on the trail. But this was different. This wasn't natural. I turned around. Whatever curiosity I had was gone. I walked fast, not quite running, but my body was screaming at me to move. The forest felt different now, darker, even though it was still morning. The trees seemed closer together, the air heavier. Then I heard it. Not an animal, not footsteps, something else. A sound, like someone exhaling sharply through their teeth. Long, slow, like they were trying not to be heard but couldn't help it. I stopped, held my breath. Silence. Then another exhale. Closer this time. I turned and ran. I don't know how far I went before I tripped. A root or a rock. I don't know. I hit the ground hard, knocking the wind out of myself. My palms scraped against the dirt. My knee throbbed, but I scrambled up, heart pounding. That's when I realized I didn't know where I was. The trail was gone. It should have been right behind me, but all I saw were trees. No path, no footprints, nothing. I turned in circles, breathing hard. How could I have gotten turned around? I had run in a straight line. Panic started creeping in. I checked my GPS. Nothing. No signal. I wasn't stupid. I knew better than to keep moving without a plan. I forced myself to breathe, to think. My best bet was to retrace my steps, find the trail again. So I did, or I tried to. I walked slow, scanning the ground, looking for any sign of where I had come from. But the more I walked, the worse it got. The forest looked the same in every direction. The trees, identical. The ground, undisturbed. It was like I had just appeared there, with no way in or out. I checked my compass. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. That's when I saw the first one. A boot print, not mine, someone else's, and fresh. The dirt around it was still damp. I wasn't alone. I followed the prints. I didn't know what else to do. At least it was something, a direction. They led me deeper into the woods. Then they stopped, just like before. But this time there was something else. Pile of rocks, small, stacked neatly. 5 of them like a marker. I turned slowly. There were more. Dozens of small rock piles, all arranged the same way. And then the smell hit me. Rot. I don't know how I missed it before. Maybe the wind shifted. Maybe I was too focused on the footprints. But now it was overwhelming. The stench of something dead, something old. I didn't want to look, but I did. Just past the last rock pile, something hung from the trees. Cloth, a jacket, torn and weathered, dangling from a low branch. And beneath it, half buried in the dirt, a hand. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting. The fingers were dark, bloated. They had been there a while. I ran. This time, I didn't stop. I didn't think. I just ran. Branches tore at my skin. My lungs burned. But I didn't slow down. Couldn't. Then, the trail. I burst onto it so suddenly I nearly fell. I spun around. The trees behind me stood silent. Still. The rock piles, the footprints, gone. I didn't wait to figure out why. I ran until I reached the parking lot. The other car was gone. I got in mine, locked the doors, and sped away. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. But weeks later, I checked the news. A hiker had gone missing in that area. A man, mid-30s. They never found him. I knew where he was, but I wasn't going back. Ever. And if you're ever out there on a trail that seems fine, on a hike that should be simple, and you see a path that isn't supposed to be there, don't take it, because you might not come back. The air was crisp that morning, the kind that bites at your skin but feels clean in your lungs, the kind of air that makes you feel awake, alive. The sky was still that deep pre-dawn blue, just starting to lighten, and the trailhead sat empty. It was perfect. I had been looking forward to this hike for months. An isolated, rugged trail deep in the mountains, far from the usual crowds. No cell service, no roads for miles. Just me, my pack, and the quiet. The first few miles were peaceful. The world was waking up around me. Birds flitting through the trees. The distant sound of a stream cutting through the silence. The ground was damp from last night's rain. The scent of wet earth thick in the air. It had rained hard, the kind that left the trees dripping and the trail slick. I didn't mind. I took my time, stepping carefully, enjoying the solitude. By midday, I had covered a good distance. My plan was to make it to a secluded backcountry site by dusk. I stopped to rest on a large rock near the trail's edge, pulling out a protein bar and my map. Everything was going as planned. The next section of the trail was more difficult, steeper, rockier, but nothing I couldn't handle. I was in shape for this. As I packed up and stood, I noticed something odd. Further up the trail, the underbrush looked disturbed. At first, I thought it was just the rain washing out parts of the trail, but as I got closer, I could see it wasn't erosion. Something or someone had moved through here recently. The ferns were bent, the soil churned up, branches snapped. It wasn't an animal. I knew what deer trails looked like, and this wasn't one. It was probably another hiker. It wasn't unusual to see signs of others, even out here, but there was something off about it. The trail was barely used, and I hadn't seen a single footprint in the mud before this. But here, the ground was torn up like someone had been running hard, pushed on. The feeling sat in the back of my mind, nagging at me, but I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was a hunter. Maybe someone got lost and doubled back. There were 100 explanations. The next few miles were harder. The trail narrowed, winding up the mountain, slick rocks making every step careful. The air had changed. It was still too still. The birds had gone quiet. It was the kind of silence that made you feel watched. Then I saw it. About 20 feet off the trail, partially hidden by ferns and moss, was a backpack. Bright red, easy to spot. It had been there for a while, long enough for leaves to start gathering around it, but not long enough to be buried completely. I stepped closer. The pack was torn. Not in a way that suggested wear and tear, but ripped open, the fabric shredded. Nearby, a single hiking boot, the laces still tied. No sign of its owner. My stomach tightened. I scanned the area, looking for anything, any sign of what had happened here. There was nothing. No blood, no tracks, no signs of struggle beyond the destroyed pack. I told myself to turn back. My gut was screaming at me. Every instinct, every primal part of me knew this wasn't right. But I was deep in already, closer to my planned campsite than the trailhead. And what if someone needed help? I pulled my bear spray from my belt and kept moving. My steps were slower now, more cautious. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, listening. The trail climbed higher. The trees thinned, opening up to a ridgeline where the wind cut through, colder now. I was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from something else. That heavy feeling pressing down on me. I reached the campsite just before dusk. It was a small clearing tucked between thick pines, flat ground, a fire pit already built from past campers. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The woods were too quiet, the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. I forced myself to set up camp, going through the motions: tent, sleeping bag, small fire. The light flickered against the trees, long shadows stretching like reaching fingers. I didn't eat. I wasn't hungry anymore. I sat by the fire, gripping my knife, listening. Then movement, not an animal. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, not crashing through the brush like a deer, but careful, controlled. I stood, my breath locked in my chest. The fire crackled, but beyond that, nothing. I held still, waiting. A branch snapped. I turned sharply, my headlamp cutting through the dark. Nothing, just trees, just emptiness. Then something moved, not toward me, away. I listened as the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. Whoever or whatever it was, they had been watching me. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against a tree, knife in my hand, bear spray in the other. The fire burned low, flickering, shadows shifting. The night stretched on, endless. Every sound made me jump. Every gust of wind felt like something moving just out of sight. Morning came slowly. The first light barely touched the trees when I packed up. I moved fast. My body ached from exhaustion, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I hiked without stopping, without looking back. I didn't feel safe until I saw my car, sitting alone at the empty trailhead, just as I had left it. I threw my pack in, got in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled onto the road, I saw it, on the dirt beside the trailhead. Fresh footprints, deep clear, leading from the trees to where my car had been parked. Someone had been waiting. I don't know why I didn't turn back sooner. I should have. Every part of me was telling me to, but I didn't listen. It was supposed to be a simple hike. Nothing too intense, nothing I hadn't done before. Just a solo trip through a quiet stretch of forest, a chance to clear my head. But nature doesn't care about your plans. I got to the trailhead early, just after sunrise. The air was crisp, carrying that damp earth smell that only comes after a night of rain. The trees were still dripping, their leaves heavy with moisture. My boots sank into the softened dirt as I started walking, following the narrow path that wound through thick undergrowth. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. The first few miles were easy. The trail was well marked, the terrain gentle. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the solitude. Birds chirped above me, and occasionally, a squirrel or rabbit darted across the path. Everything felt normal. It wasn't until I passed the old wooden sign, half-rotted, its lettering almost unreadable, that I started to feel off. I don't know what the sign used to say. Maybe it marked a junction in the trail. Maybe it was a warning. It didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that crept over me as I walked past it. Like the air had thickened, like I had stepped into something I wasn't supposed to. I shook it off, kept walking. An hour passed, then another. The trees started to close in, their trunks pressing tighter on either side of the trail. The undergrowth grew thicker, clawing at my legs. The path itself had become less distinct, narrowing to little more than a strip of packed earth. I checked my map. According to it, I was still on the right track, but it didn't feel right. I hadn't seen another trail marker in a while, and the forest was too still. No birds, no rustling leaves, just my footsteps, crunching in the dirt. Then I saw the footprints. They were faint, half erased by the damp soil, but they were there. Human, barefoot. The prints were small, child-sized, and they trailed off into the trees. I stopped, heart hammering. There shouldn't have been anyone else out here, not this deep in. and definitely not a kid walking barefoot through the woods. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move past them to keep going. But my pace had slowed. My confidence was gone. The trail kept twisting, winding in ways that didn't make sense. I checked my map again, my compass. The needle spun lazily before settling, pointing me in a direction that didn't match what I knew was north. I turned, adjusting my course, but every step felt wrong, like I was walking in circles. The trees all looked the same, towering and dark, their bark slick with rain. My breathing quickened. I wasn't lost, couldn't be lost, but I was. I pushed forward, trying to shake the unease. But then I smelled it, something rotten, faint at first, but growing stronger with each step. It was a thick, wet smell, like meat left out in the sun too long. My stomach turned. I pressed my sleeve to my nose, scanning the trees. Something was out there. Then I heard it. Not an animal, not the wind, something else. A shuffle of movement just beyond the trees, too heavy to be a deer. My skin prickled. I didn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. I forced myself to keep moving, faster now, my boots thudding against the damp ground. The smell grew stronger. I felt it in the back of my throat, and then I saw it. Carcass, a deer or what was left of one. Its ribs jutted out from torn flesh, its body bloated, flies swarming over the open wounds. The eyes were gone, eaten. My stomach lurched, but it wasn't just the sight that made my blood go cold. It was the way the body was arranged. Laid out, its legs bent at unnatural angles, like it had been placed there deliberately. I turned, heart pounding, and froze. There was something behind me, a shape in the trees, tall, motionless. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline, just the sense of something watching. My body locked up, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. I stood there, staring, waiting for it to move, to come closer. Didn't. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a few seconds, maybe minutes. But when I finally forced myself to step back, to move, the figure was gone. Just gone. Like it had never been there. But I knew it had. I knew something had been there, watching me. I ran. I didn't care about the trail, about the map. I just ran, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. The feeling, that overwhelming, suffocating sense of being watched, never left me. It chased me, even though I never heard footsteps behind me. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. Then suddenly, I was back at the rotting wooden sign. I nearly collapsed with relief. Somehow I had looped back. Somehow I had made it out. I forced myself to slow down, to breathe, my whole body shaking. I wasn't safe yet, but I was close. The parking lot was still miles away, but the trail was familiar now. I could make it. I walked the rest of the way, never stopping, never letting myself rest. Even when my legs begged for a break, even when my throat was raw from breathing so hard, I kept going. The forest stayed silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my footsteps, and the feeling, always that feeling that I wasn't alone. When I finally reached my car, I didn't stop to catch my breath. I threw open the door, jumped inside, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I sped out of there, tires kicking up gravel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, until I saw houses, people, until I felt normal again. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know what was watching me, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I'll never go back. I don't know why I agreed to do it alone. Maybe I just wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I was sick of the noise, the stress, the weight of life pressing down on me. The plan was simple. A 3-day solo hike through a remote stretch of forest, somewhere deep in the mountains, far from people, far from anything. I wanted the quiet. I wanted to be alone with nothing but trees, wind, and the sound of my own breathing. I parked my car at the trailhead just after sunrise. It was mid-October, the kind of weather where it's cold in the morning, but once you get moving, you start sweating under your jacket. The forest was still, except for the occasional bird call or rustling of leaves. The trail was well marked, but I knew from my map that the farther in I went, the less maintained it would be. That was the appeal. No people, no distractions, just me and the wild. The first day went exactly as planned. I covered about 12 miles before setting up camp near a small creek. I ate my dinner, watched the stars come out, and fell asleep to the sound of running water. It was peaceful, everything I wanted. But something woke me in the middle of the night. It was a sound, distant but sharp, cutting through the quiet like a needle. It wasn't an animal sound, at least not one I recognized. It was high-pitched, then stopped abruptly, like someone had cut it off mid-breath. My heart pounded. I stayed still, listening. The forest was silent again, like it had swallowed whatever made the noise. I convinced myself it was nothing. A bird, maybe, a fox. I forced myself back to sleep. The second day, I moved deeper into the forest. The trail became rougher, less defined. I had to check my map more often. The trees grew denser. The air felt heavier. I noticed the silence more. The further I went, the less life I saw. No birds, no squirrels, just trees standing like tall, dark sentinels. Around midday, I found something strange. It was an old campsite, but it had been abandoned for a long time. The tent was still there, half collapsed, covered in leaves and dirt. A fire pit sat in the center, filled with ash and scattered rocks. Nearby, a few rusted cans lay half buried in the soil. Whoever had camped here never packed up. I stepped closer. The tent's entrance was partially open. Inside, a sleeping bag lay unzipped, covered in a layer of dead leaves. A backpack slumped against the side. I hesitated, then reached in and pulled it out. The zippers were rusted, but I got them open. Clothes, a flashlight with dead batteries, a water bottle. Then I found the notebook. It was weathered, the pages warped from rain. Most of the writing was smudged, unreadable, but some of the words were still clear. Something is wrong. I keep hearing it at night. It's closer now. I read the words over and over. My stomach tightened. I looked around, suddenly aware of how alone I was, how deep I was into this forest. Whoever wrote this had been afraid. I closed the notebook and put it back. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they got scared, left in a hurry, and just never came back for their stuff. But something about the way the words were written, the frantic slant of the handwriting, made my skin crawl. I kept moving. That night, I camped further up the trail. I made a fire, cooked my food, and tried to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then I heard it again. The same sound from the night before. Closer. A high, sharp cry, then silence. My fire crackled, casting shadows against the trees. My breath felt too loud. I gripped my knife, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I was exhausted. I debated turning back, but I had one more day to go before the loop brought me back toward my car. I told myself I was being paranoid. I packed up and kept walking. By midday, the trail was barely visible. I relied on my map and compass. The trees felt closer now, the air heavier. Then I saw them. Footprints. Fresh ones. They weren't mine, and they weren't boot prints. They were bare feet, deep in the dirt like whoever made them was heavy. I followed them with my eyes. They came from the trees, crossed the trail, and disappeared back into the forest. A wave of unease crawled up my spine. I stood there, gripping my pack straps, scanning the woods. Nothing. I forced myself to keep moving, but now every sound made me flinch. Every rustle, every creak of a branch. I felt watched. The sun started dipping lower. I needed to find a place to camp. Then I smelled it. Something rotten. The wind shifted, and the stench hit me harder. It was thick, sickly sweet. Decay. I hesitated, then followed the smell. Just a few steps off the trail, just to see. Then I saw it. A deer, or what was left of one. His body was twisted, half covered in leaves. The flesh was torn, but not eaten. No scavengers had touched it. Its eyes were gone. Something was wrong. I turned back fast, nearly running to my pack. I needed to get out. Out. I pushed hard, hiking faster than I ever had. I didn't stop. My legs ached. My lungs burned. But I kept going, deeper into the night, refusing to stop. The sound came again. Behind me, closer. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see. I ran until I couldn't anymore. I collapsed against a tree, gasping. The forest was silent again, but I knew it was still there, watching. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back to the tree, gripping my knife, waiting for the sun. When morning came, I moved, fast. I found the trail again and I followed it without stopping. My body screamed for rest, but I didn't care. I made it back to my car just as the sun started setting again. I got in, locked the doors, and drove without looking back. I don't know what was out there. I don't want to know. I'll never go back. I should have turned back. I should have known better, but I kept going. The trail was supposed to be an easy loop, nothing complicated, nothing dangerous. I'd hiked plenty of times before, alone and with friends. I knew how to prepare, how to read maps, how to pack light but bring the essentials. This was supposed to be just another quiet day on the trails. I started early, right after sunrise, when the air was still cool. My backpack was snug against my shoulders, loaded with a full water bottle, some protein bars, a first aid kit, and my phone, fully charged. The first mile was easy. The dirt trail was packed and well-maintained, winding through a forest of tall pines and thick underbrush. Birds chirped in the trees. A soft breeze rustled the leaves. I felt good, alive. The trail gradually narrowed as I gained elevation. The trees thickened, and the light filtering through the canopy became dimmer. I noticed fewer signs of recent hikers, no footprints, no broken twigs, no wrappers left behind by careless people. That should have been my first clue that I was heading into a less traveled section. But I pressed on. The map showed a loop that would take me back to my car in about 5 miles. It wasn't supposed to be difficult. Somewhere around mile 3, I realized I hadn't seen a single person since I started. No hikers, no runners, no mountain bikers. The silence grew heavier, like a weight pressing on my shoulders. I told myself it was fine. Not every trail was crowded, and it was a weekday morning. Most people were probably at work. Then I saw the footprints. They were fresh, too fresh. The dirt was still loose, not yet settled. Someone had passed through recently, but what made me stop was the way they looked. Deep, uneven impressions. Someone had been running, and not in the casual, steady rhythm of a jogger. These prints were erratic, the kind you'd make if you were sprinting full speed, maybe looking back as you ran. I swallowed hard and glanced around. No movement, no sounds except for the trees shifting in the breeze. I kept going, but my pace slowed. My body tensed. Every few minutes, I stopped and listened, holding my breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. The farther I walked, the worse I felt. My stomach was tight. My hands were damp with sweat. My brain screamed at me to turn around, but my legs kept moving forward. That's when I found the backpack. It was half buried in the underbrush, just off the trail. I hesitated before stepping closer. It was navy blue, covered in dirt, the zippers half open. One strap was torn, as if it had been yanked violently. I nudged it with my foot. It wasn't old, no mold, no signs of long-term exposure to the elements. Whoever left it there had done so recently. I crouched down, scanning the area before carefully pulling the bag open. Inside, I found a water bottle, half empty, protein bar still in its wrapper, phone, the screen shattered, and a single hiking boot. No wallet, no keys, no ID. Just those things, as if someone had abandoned it in a hurry. A sharp rustling in the bushes made my blood run cold. I shot to my feet, heart hammering, eyes darting in every direction. The noise came from somewhere up ahead, beyond a thick cluster of trees. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too close. I took a step back, then another. Every nerve in my body told me to run. But where? Forward into the unknown? Back the way I came? Then I heard it. Not an animal. Not the wind. A deep, ragged breath. I bolted. I ran like my life depended on it because in that moment, I knew it did. The trees blurred past me as I sprinted down the trail, my backpack bouncing against my spine. My legs burned. My lungs screamed for air. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. Somewhere along the way, I lost the trail. The packed dirt turned to loose leaves, the clear path disappearing into tangled undergrowth. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree. My breath came in ragged gasps. I forced myself to listen. Silence. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. I turned in a slow circle, trying to regain my bearings. The trees all looked the same, endless and towering. My phone. I yanked it from my pocket, fingers fumbling as I tried to open the map. No signal. Of course. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the panic rising in my throat. I needed to stay calm. I needed to think. I moved carefully now, trying to retrace my steps, but everything felt wrong. The forest pressed in on me. The silence felt unnatural. I checked my phone again, hoping for even the weakest signal. Still nothing. The battery was already dropping from the constant searching. Then I saw the second boot. Not mine. The match to the one in the backpack. Lying on its side near the base of a tree, dirt smeared across the leather. My stomach twisted. Someone had lost this. Someone had run through here, and I had no idea where they were now. A sickening realization settled in my gut. They hadn't just run. They hadn't just lost their belongings. They had never made it out. I moved faster, fighting the urge to break into another sprint. I needed to be smart, careful. The ground sloped downward, and I followed it, hoping it would lead to a stream or a road or anything that could help me find my way out. Then, ahead of me, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. Clearing, and in the middle of it, a campsite. A tent torn open at the side. A fire pit, cold and scattered. A jacket hanging from a low branch, sleeves flapping in the breeze. No people. I didn't dare step closer. My eyes scanned the ground, the trees, the shadows between them. Everything in me screamed that I wasn't supposed to be here. Then I heard the breathing again. Closer this time. I ran. I don't remember how long or in what direction. I just ran, blindly, my body on autopilot, crashing through branches. My skin scraped raw. My legs threatened to give out, but I forced them to keep moving. And then, finally, I saw it. A road. I stumbled onto the pavement, gasping for air, collapsing to my knees. The sight of it nearly made me sob. I wasn't sure how far I had wandered from the trailhead, but it didn't matter. I was out. I was safe. I never found out what happened to the person who left those footprints, the backpack, the boots. I called the authorities once I had service again, gave them everything I remembered. They took my statement seriously, but I never heard anything back. No news reports, no missing person alerts, just silence. I haven't hiked alone since. I had been planning this solo hiking trip for weeks. The thought of being alone in the woods, away from work and responsibilities, sounded perfect. I chose a remote trail deep in the mountains, far from any towns or busy parks. It was an old logging trail, barely marked on any maps, and I had to dig through online forums to find scattered mentions of it. A few people had hiked it before, but there wasn't much information, just vague warnings about rough terrain and unpredictable weather. That was fine by me. I wanted something challenging. I set out early in the morning, my pack loaded with supplies. The first few miles were easy, a well-worn path cutting through thick trees. The scent of pine filled the air, and the only sounds were my boots crunching the dirt and the occasional bird overhead. The deeper I went, the less maintained the trail became. By midday, the path was barely visible, more of a suggestion than a trail. I had to check my GPS frequently to make sure I was still going the right way. The deeper I went, the more I felt a strange sense of unease. It wasn't anything obvious, just a feeling in my gut that something was off. Maybe it was the quiet, the usual forest sounds. Birds, rustling leaves, distant animal noises had faded. It was just me and the wind through the trees. I shook it off and kept going. I was used to overthinking things, and I wasn't going to let a little paranoia ruin my trip. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing where I planned to set up camp. The area was flat and surrounded by trees, with a small stream nearby. It was perfect. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and cooked a simple meal. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the temperature dropped fast. The fire crackled, casting long shadows. I sat by it, enjoying the peace. Then I heard something, a faint snapping sound, like a twig breaking. I froze, listening. Nothing. Probably just an animal, I told myself. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My headlamp only reached so far into the trees, and beyond that, it was just blackness. I forced myself to ignore it and crawled into my tent. The wind picked up, rustling the fabric. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and tried to sleep. A sound woke me up. It was subtle at first, a faint rustling. Then it grew louder. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath. They weren't animal footsteps. Too heavy. They stopped just outside my tent. My heart pounded. I reached for my knife, gripping it tight. The footsteps circled the tent, then stopped again. I could hear breathing, slow, measured breaths. My fingers clenched tighter around the knife handle. Then silence. I stayed awake for hours, listening, but nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I dozed off. When I woke up, the sun was rising, and everything seemed normal. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just tired and my mind played tricks on me. But when I stepped outside, I saw them, footprints. Human footprints circling my tent. My stomach dropped. I wasn't alone last night. I packed up fast. I wasn't going to stick around to find out who or what had been watching me. I checked my GPS and started moving, but something felt wrong. No matter how far I walked, I wasn't making progress. The landscape looked the same, and my GPS signal kept cutting out. My phone's battery, which should have lasted another day, drained rapidly. I felt a wave of panic but forced myself to stay calm. Then, I saw something up ahead, a figure standing in the trees. Too far to make out details, but I knew it was a person. My breath caught in my throat. They didn't move, just stood there watching. I took a step back. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that running blindly in an unknown area was a bad idea. I forced myself to keep walking, my eyes locked on the figure. But when I reached the spot where they had been, there was no one there. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been standing there at all. I walked faster. My goal was to reach a service road a few miles ahead where I could hopefully find my way back to civilization. But no matter how far I walked, I never seemed to get closer. The trees all looked the same. The sun started to dip lower, and dread crept up my spine. Then I saw it, my campsite, the same one I had left hours ago. My heart pounded. This wasn't possible. I had been walking in a straight line. There was no way I had looped back to the same spot. My fire pit was still there, the ground disturbed where my tent had been. It was like I had never left. Panic set in. My hands shook as I tried my GPS again. No signal. My map didn't make sense anymore. I turned in circles, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they weren't slow. They were running, charging toward me from the trees. I didn't think. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran as fast as I could, dodging branches and stumbling over roots. The sound of footsteps followed, gaining on me. I felt something graze the back of my pack, almost yanking me backward. I screamed and pushed harder, lungs burning. Then light, a flickering beam through the trees. A road. I burst through the tree line and onto asphalt, nearly collapsing. Headlights blinded me as a truck screeched to a stop. A man jumped out, yelling. I could barely speak, gasping for air, pointing back at the trees. He looked, but there was nothing there. No movement, no footsteps, just empty woods. He drove me to the nearest town where I called for help. Rangers went back to the area, but they didn't find anyone. No footprints, no disturbed ground, nothing. It was like I had imagined the whole thing. But I know what I heard, what I felt. Something was out there, and it had been watching me the whole time. I started the hike early, just as the sun was rising over the hills. The air was cool, crisp, and the forest smelled fresh from last night's rain. My pack was snug on my shoulders, filled with everything I'd need for an overnight trek. Water, snacks, first aid kit, flashlight, extra batteries, a knife, everything. I had checked the weather, and it was supposed to stay clear for the next 2 days. Perfect conditions. The trail was one I had been meaning to do for a while. It was a little off the beaten path, not one of the more popular ones. That was part of the reason I chose it. No crowds, no noise, just me and the wilderness. It was marked as moderate in difficulty, but I had done harder ones before. The plan was to hike to a small, secluded lake about 12 miles in, set up camp, and hike back the next morning. Simple. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. The trail was narrow, weaving through thick trees, but the markers were easy to spot. Birds chirped in the distance, and every so often, I'd hear the rustling of something small moving through the underbrush, probably squirrels or rabbits. A few times, I saw deer standing in the distance, their heads snapping up as they noticed me before disappearing into the trees. After about 5 miles, I reached a clearing with a large rock formation jutting out. It looked like a good spot to rest, so I sat down, pulled out my water bottle, and took a long drink. The view was incredible. Rolling hills stretched for miles, and in the distance, I could see a thin shimmer of what had to be the lake. I checked my map and GPS. Everything was on track. After a short break, I continued. That's when things started to feel different. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The birds had stopped chirping. No wind rustling the leaves, no distant animal noises, just stillness. It wasn't something I thought too much about at first. Sometimes forests go quiet, nothing unusual. But as I walked, the quiet continued. Then the trail became harder to follow. The markers were still there, but spaced farther apart. The dirt path narrowed, and in some spots it looked like it hadn't been used in years. Maybe this trail wasn't as popular as I thought. I checked my GPS again. It still showed me on the right path. A few miles later, the trail started to incline steeply. I had expected some elevation gain, but this was more than I had prepared for. The trees grew denser, the ground rockier. My pace slowed. I glanced at my watch. If I kept moving, I'd still make it to the lake before dark. Then I noticed something strange. The ground was disturbed. Not in the way hikers might leave footprints, this was different. The dirt was dug up in patches like something had been rooting around. Large areas of soil looked like they had been clawed at. I stopped and crouched down. The marks weren't human. They were deep, like an animal had been digging for something. I stood up and kept moving. A little while later, I found a broken branch hanging at an odd angle from a tree. It had been snapped, but not by the wind. It looked like something heavy had come through. As I moved forward, I saw more signs. Scattered fur caught on bushes, deep scratches in tree trunks, and even a few bones. Animal bones, but stripped clean. Something had been hunting here. I wasn't scared, not yet. I had seen signs of predators before while hiking. Bears, cougars, coyotes. It was normal, but something about this felt wrong. Then I saw the boot print. It was half buried in the dirt, old, but unmistakable. Someone had been here before me, but why was there only one? I scanned the area but didn't see any other tracks. Just the one boot print, and around it more of those deep, clawed-up patches of earth. I kept moving. The trees closed in even more, the sky barely visible through the thick canopy. I checked my GPS. Still on the trail, but I hadn't seen a single marker in over an hour. The air felt heavier, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something faint but unpleasant. Decay. I walked faster. Then I found the tent. It was old, torn, partially collapsed. It sat just off the trail, hidden behind some trees. A fire pit, long since cold, sat nearby. Gear was scattered around. An old backpack, shredded sleeping bag, rusted cooking pot. No people. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The backpack was partially unzipped. I nudged it open with my foot. Inside were clothes, a flashlight, and a notebook. I picked up the notebook, flipped through it. The first few pages were normal entries about hiking, notes about the trail. Then the handwriting became frantic. Something is watching me. I hear it at night. The trees are wrong. I need to leave. The last entry was just one word, scribbled over and over. Run. I dropped the notebook. My body felt ice cold. My brain screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to get back to my car as fast as possible. But I had come too far. The lake wasn't far now. Then I heard it, a deep guttural sound. Not a growl, not a roar, something in between. It came from somewhere in the trees. I ran.
Branches tore at my arms, my legs.
My pack bounced hard against my back. I didn't look behind me. I didn't stop. I just ran. The trail blurred past. I knew I was going the right way, but I wasn't thinking about that anymore. I was thinking about getting out, about the notebook, about the prints in the dirt, about that awful watching silence. After what felt like forever, I broke into a clearing. My car was there. I didn't even remember getting back to the trailhead. I just threw my pack off, yanked my keys out, and got in. The second the engine roared to life, I locked the doors and sped down the dirt road. I didn't stop until I was miles away. I never reported the campsite. I never told anyone what I found. I don't know if I was just being paranoid, if I imagined things, if the fear made it worse than it was. But I do know one thing. I will never go back. I should have known better than to hike alone. It wasn't my first time, not by a long shot. But there's always that little part of you that wonders what would happen if things went wrong. And this time, they did. It started as just another weekend trip, a solo trek through the dense wilderness of the national forest. I had planned a 3-day hike, packing everything I thought I'd need. A good tent, extra layers, a full water reservoir, and a decent amount of food. I even had a map and a compass, along with my phone and an emergency beacon in case something went really wrong. But it wasn't supposed to. The first day was uneventful. The trail was rougher than I remembered, with long stretches of jagged rock and mud from the last week's rain. My boots held up fine, but my legs burned by the time I set up camp near a small creek. The air was cool, crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I cooked a simple meal on my portable stove, ate while listening to the wind in the trees, and went to bed early. That night, something woke me up. A sharp snap of a branch close by. Too close. I lay still, heart pounding in my chest, listening. The forest was never truly quiet, but this was different. I reached for my flashlight, clicking it on and shining it outside the thin fabric of my tent. Nothing. Maybe a deer, I told myself, or a raccoon scavenging for food. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I packed up quickly, trying to shake the unease that clung to me. The trail ahead was steep, leading up toward a ridge where I planned to stop for lunch. The climb took longer than I expected, my pack feeling heavier with each step. Sweat dripped down my back, and my breathing grew ragged. But when I reached the top, the view made it all worth it. Endless stretches of green, rolling hills fading into blue in the distance. It was beautiful, peaceful. Then I saw it. Down in the valley below, maybe a mile or two away, something moved through the trees. Too far to make out details, but it was fast, darting between the thick trunks. My stomach twisted. Could have been an animal, sure, but something about it felt off. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild after last night's disturbance. I ate quickly, kept moving. By late afternoon, the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the trail. My legs ached, my shoulders stiff from the weight of my pack. I needed to find a place to set up camp before it got too dark. The map showed a clearing near a small lake, just a couple of miles ahead. I pushed on, every muscle in my body screaming for rest. The clearing was perfect, flat, open enough to keep an eye on my surroundings, with easy access to water. I set up my tent, stretched out my sore legs, and took a few minutes to soak my feet in the cold lake. The water was icy, sending a sharp sting through my skin, but it felt good, refreshing. I let myself relax, just for a little while. Then I saw the footprints, leading away from the water's edge, deep in the damp earth. Bare feet, no shoes, no boots, just human footprints, large and clear. I stared at them, my mind struggling to make sense of it. Someone else had been here recently. Maybe another hiker? But why no shoes? I felt exposed, vulnerable. I stood up, scanning the tree line, half expecting to see someone watching me. Nothing, just the quiet rustle of the wind through the trees. My skin prickled, that same uneasy feeling creeping back. I forced myself to shake it off, told myself it didn't mean anything. People did weird things in the woods sometimes. Maybe they'd gone for a swim. Maybe they lost their shoes. A dozen explanations ran through my mind, none of them comforting. Night fell fast. The temperature dropped, and the stillness of the forest grew heavier. I crawled into my tent, zipped up tight, but sleep wouldn't come. Every noise outside made me tense, listening. A twig snapped, leaves rustled. Something moved just beyond the glow of my flashlight. I held my breath, heart hammering against my ribs. Then the breathing started. Slow, steady, right outside my tent. Not an animal. Not the quick, sharp breaths of a deer or the snuffling of a raccoon. This was different, deep, deliberate, human. I didn't move, couldn't. My mind screamed at me to do something, but all I could do was lay there, staring at the thin fabric between me and whatever was out there. The breathing went on for what felt like forever. Then silence. I reached for my knife. My fingers closed around the handle, gripping it so tight my knuckles ached. I waited, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my own pulse. Nothing. Minutes passed, then an hour. Slowly, I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. I had to stay rational. I had to make it till morning. I don't think I slept at all. When the first light crept through the trees, I was already packing. My hands shook as I rolled up my tent, stuffing everything into my pack as fast as I could. I needed to get out of there. Now, I kept my knife in my hand as I started down the trail, my eyes darting to every shadow, every shift in the trees. The footprints were still there, fresh in the dirt. But now there were more of them. I walked faster, then faster still. The uneasy silence of the forest felt suffocating, pressing down on me. I could feel it, something was wrong. I wasn't alone. Then I heard it. Footsteps, behind me, matching my pace. Slow at first, then quicker as I sped up. I turned, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was following me. I broke into a run. My pack slammed against my back with every step, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The trail blurred beneath my feet, twisting and turning through the thick woods. I didn't care about the pain in my legs, the burning in my lungs. I just had to get out. Then I saw the car, my car, parked at the trailhead, just 100 yards away. Relief crashed over me, so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. I sprinted the last stretch, yanked open the door, and threw myself inside. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, jamming them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out onto the road, not daring to look back. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. Only then did I let myself breathe, my entire body trembling. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't want to know. I won't be hiking alone again. I started hiking early that morning, wanting to make it up to the ridge before noon. The weather was perfect, cool air, a little mist clinging to the trees, and the scent of damp earth filling my lungs. I had checked the forecast the night before. No rain, no storms, just a steady day of clear skies. I packed my bag with enough water, some protein bars, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and a knife just in case. I wasn't expecting to need it, but I liked to be prepared. The trail started out easy, well-trodden and lined with old wooden signs that were half-rotted from years of exposure. I passed a couple of early hikers heading back down, exchanging brief nods but not stopping to talk. I liked hiking alone. It gave me time to clear my head, escape the noise of everyday life, and just focus on moving forward. A few miles in, the trees started to thin, and I caught my first real view of the valley below. The fog was still settled in the low points, rolling like waves, and for a moment, I just stood there, taking it in. The sun was rising higher, burning off the mist bit by bit. It was the kind of view that made the sweat and sore muscles worth it. I kept going, pushing deeper into the woods. The path became narrower, less maintained. The markers were more spread out, and the dirt was damp from the rain earlier that week. I watched my footing, stepping over roots and avoiding loose rocks. A couple of times I stopped to listen, just the usual forest sounds. Birds, rustling leaves, the distant creak of branches in the wind. Then, about 4 miles in, I noticed something off. At first, it was just a feeling, the kind of thing that makes your skin prickle without knowing why. The trees around me felt different, thicker, the air heavier. The sounds of the forest had changed too, quieter, like the world was holding its breath. I shook it off and kept moving, but then I saw it, a boot print in the mud. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. The deep impression was still defined, the edges only slightly softened by the dampness. That wasn't what bothered me, though. It was the way the print faced. Not forward, like someone else had been hiking ahead of me. It faced sideways, like whoever left it had turned sharply and stepped off the path into the woods. I stood there for a while, staring at it. I wasn't the only person out here. There were bound to be other hikers, maybe even hunters. But something about that print made my stomach twist. It looked deliberate. Not like someone had wandered off by accident, but like they had purposefully left the trail. I glanced around but saw nothing but trees. I kept walking, trying to shake off the unease. But it stayed with me, sticking to my ribs like a weight. The path became even less defined, the forest pressing in closer. I checked my map and compass. I was still on track, but the terrain didn't match what I remembered reading about. The incline was steeper than I'd expected, and the trees were older, their bark gnarled and twisted. I hadn't seen a single trail marker in at least a mile. Then I saw another footprint, and another. This time they were clearer, fresher. A single set, leading off into the trees. I stopped again, my pulse picking up. They weren't mine. They were deeper, heavier, made by someone bigger than me. And they led straight off the path, just like the first one. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had gone off-trail to relieve themselves or to explore. But then I noticed something else. The forest was dead silent. No birds, no wind, just me and my breathing. I swallowed hard, gripping my backpack straps, and kept moving. I picked up my pace, my boots crunching against the dirt, the sound too loud in the quiet. I needed to get to the ridge. Once I was up there, I'd have a clear view, and I could reorient myself properly. Then, ahead of me, something moved. A figure, just a glimpse between the trees. A flash of dark clothing, the shape of a person. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone approaching. No footsteps, no snapping branches. Just that quick flicker of movement, there and gone. My mouth went dry. I turned, scanning the trees. Nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I forced myself to keep walking, but I was hyper-aware now. Every sound, every shadow. My skin itched like I was being watched. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. Closer this time. Someone was following me. I didn't run. Running in the woods on unfamiliar terrain was a great way to twist an ankle or worse. But I moved fast, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled out my knife, keeping it low and ready. I wasn't planning on using it, but having it in my hand made me feel a little less helpless. I kept moving, checking behind me every few steps. Nothing. Then suddenly the trail opened up. I was at the ridge. The valley spread out below me, the river cutting through like a silver ribbon. I could see the parking lot in the far distance, My car just a tiny speck. Relief flooded me. I wasn't lost. I wasn't trapped. I turned to look back down the trail. No one. Nothing but trees. I stayed there for a long time, catching my breath, forcing myself to calm down. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind had turned a normal, quiet hike into something sinister. Or maybe I had just been lucky. I started my descent, moving quickly, not stopping until I reached my car. I locked the doors, sat there for a moment, and let out a shaky breath. I never did figure out who or what I had seen, but I never hiked that trail again.